Chapter 40-47. That's true. He's a superstar. Why would he come to a primary school? Everyone heard this. That's true. Hence, they didn't take it to heart. Hua Jin stood quietly among the group of parents until Xiao Yichen and Yu walked out of the classroom with Hua Jin. The other children walked out and told their parents in surprise that the person who had been waiting at the classroom entrance was Hua Jin. All the parents were shocked. So it really was Hua Jin. However, a few teachers immediately rushed over and instructed the parents not to spread the news of Hua Jin entering and exiting the school. Otherwise, if the media were to find out about it, they would definitely fabricate reports about it and spread rumors about it. The three of them arrived at the school gate one after another. However, they suddenly saw a raptor parked at the school gate. It was such a big car that it was almost the most eye-catching car at the school gate. Hua Jin glanced over and saw Gong Jia leaning against the raptor. He was so shocked that his eyes widened. Gong Jia. D***M. Why was he here? Xiao Yichen was surprised to see Gong Jia. However, he immediately remembered and said, "Oh, I remember now. Uncle said that he would pick us up from school today." Hua Jin frowned and asked, "Eh? Didn't the chauffeur pick you up? Something happened at the chauffeur's house today. I heard that his wife had an accident and was hospitalized. He had to take care of her at the hospital. Because it happened so suddenly, he asked Uncle to pick us up." When Hua Jin heard this, he broke out in a cold sweat and immediately said, "Let's pretend that we didn't see him. Let's go." Xiao Yichen's lips twitched when he heard this. He was a little embarrassed and said, "Is that really okay? If Uncle didn't see us, he would be very angry." Gong Fan raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. Xiao Yichen was a little worried. Uncle can be very scary when he gets angry. Hua Jin was speechless. He pondered for a moment and then said quietly, "How about this? I'll leave first. You can follow him home, okay?" Xiao Yichen was about to nod when he stared blankly behind him with a horrified expression. Hua Jin saw his horrified expression and didn't react at first. He turned around abruptly and almost bumped into Gong Jia's chest. Hua Jin was speechless. He slowly raised his head and saw Gong Jia looking at him condescendingly with a cold smile on his face. Hua Jin was not short. At 1.8 meters, he was considered very tall, but Gong Jia was 8 to 9 centimeters taller than him. Don't underestimate this height. It was enough for Hua Jin to look up to him. Damn it, did he have to be so tall? When Hua Jin saw him, he greeted him awkwardly. "You. What a coincidence. Haha." He laughed awkwardly and rubbed his hands. He was obviously very guilty. His lips curled into a lukewarm smile as he retorted, "Who's the one who wants to leave quietly? Why? Did you see a ghost?" Hua Jin shook his head in horror. No. The corners of Gong Jia's lips curled upward, and the fear in Hua Jin's eyes intensified. Why did he have to stare at him with such a terrifying expression? "Well, I have something to do. I'll leave first." Hua Jin shrunk his neck and was about to escape when Gong Jia raised his hand and grabbed him by the back of his collar. Chapter 40-48. Gong Jia sat in the driver's seat and adjusted the rearview mirror. Hua Jin's pale face was reflected in the mirror. He didn't know why, but he felt as though he had been scared silly and was dumbstruck. Looking at his soulless and empty eyes, Gong Jia suddenly felt like laughing, but he held it back and snorted nonchalantly. Hua Jin shivered again. Gong Jia gave him a meaningful glance and put on his seatbelt as though nothing had happened. Gong Fan sat in the front passenger seat. When he got into the car, he crossed his arms and looked calm. Hua Jin felt as though he was in an icehouse filled with despair. Who's going to save him? Hua Jin gulped and asked carefully, "Where are we going?" Gong Jia asked him back expressionlessly, "Where do you want to go?" Hua Jin said weakly, "Actually, I have something to do tonight." "Walking around? Why are you so afraid of me?" I'm not going to eat you up. Hua Jin frowned, but he sighed in his heart. How infuriating. He also felt that it was very strange. He didn't know why, but Gong Jie had left a very deep and terrifying impression on him. He felt that he was a super dangerous person. However, Hua Jin also knew that no matter how much Gong Jie disliked him, he wouldn't do anything to him. He wouldn't kill him or eat him up, but his fear of Gong Jie was instinctive. Instinctive fear. Gong Jie said coldly, I'm not going to eat you up. You don't have to be so afraid of me. He sized up Hua Jin through the rearview mirror, and Hua Jin could also size up Gong Jie through the rearview mirror. Gong Jie didn't know why, but even though he was smiling, he felt as though a layer of ice had formed on his face. He realized that Gong Jie and Gong Fan were indeed uncle and nephew. Regardless of whether he was happy or unhappy, he always acted like he was unapproachable to outsiders. But, even when he was angry, he still looked gentle in front of Yunshishi. He couldn't be more envious. In this world, perhaps only Yunshishi could enjoy such a privilege. Originally, the atmosphere between Hua Jin and Xiao Yichen was very harmonious. However, ever since they got into Gong Jie's car, both of them were as quiet as chickens. Although Xiao Yichen and the Gong Jie seemed to be getting along well, in reality, Xiao Yichen was also relatively quiet in front of the Gong Jie. He did not dare to speak carelessly, because Gong Jie would scold him. Gong Jie's mouth was also very vicious. He was almost on par with Yu Yu, and he hit the nail on the head. He still remembered that Xiao Yichen had drawn a picture and showed it to Yunshishi as though he was presenting a treasure. Gong Jie happened to be beside them, and he quietly said, Is this a scribble? Xiao Yichen's entire being withered. How could they bully him like this? Moreover, the uncle and nephew were ganging up to bully him. Gong Jie even said that Xiao Yichen's genes must have mutated. Otherwise, how could you be so stupid when Xiao Yichen was so smart? However, fortunately, Mu Yazhe was on Xiao Yichen's side. He casually said, Why don't you say that Yu's genes have mutated? His IQ is already considered heaven-defying for a child his age. Although this sentence didn't carry much weight. But, at least he had his daddy's support. It could be said that the family was divided into two factions. Mu Yazhe and Xiao Yichen, Hua Jin, Yu Yu, and Gong Jie. Yunshishi was in the middle. At that moment, they happened to pass by the intersection of the street. Chapter 40-49. Gong Jie immediately stopped the car and instructed Xiao Yichen, Sit here obediently. Uncle will buy it for you. After a pause, he glanced at Gong Fan. Do you want some? Gong Fan's face was full of disdain. No. Then what do you want to drink? Wolfberry tea. Gong Jie mocked, Are you a Buddhist primary school student? You're so young and you're already so concerned about your health. I don't like things that are too sweet. Hua Jin muttered curiously, That can't be. Doesn't Yu like sweet things? In the past, Yu especially liked to drink cola. Other than cola, she also loved other sweets. However, Gong Fan was different. He only drank cola and politely declined other sweets. Gong Jie looked at Hua Jin again. What about you? Are you treating me to a drink? Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and was a little displeased. What else? You? No. There are too many people. Gong Jie didn't say anything and only instructed him to take care of the two children. The car door closed with a bang, leaving Hua Jin and Xiao Yichen looking at each other. Gong Fan said, Why does it feel like a husband asking his wife to take care of the children? When Hua Jin heard this, his face turned red with anger. Hey, don't spout nonsense. Gong Fan said, I'm just spouting nonsense. Why are you so agitated? Hua Jin was speechless. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he held back his laughter the entire time. His shoulders shook as he secretly laughed. After hearing what Gong Fan said, he also realized that it was true. From the looks of it, his uncle was really like a husband who went out to work, and Hua Jin was like a stay-at-home wife who stayed at home to take care of the children. When he thought about it, it really did look like it. Xiao Yichen covered his mouth and snickered. Hua Jin complained, "What are you laughing at?" Now that he says it like that, it's quite vivid. Little Yichen put on a serious face. Seriously speaking, have you considered my uncle's offer? He's so handsome and rich. If you follow him, you can be at ease and be the Gong madam. Hua Jin looked at him with disdain. Are you trying to sell me out? I'm betraying my uncle. Speak of the devil. When Gong Jie returned with the milk tea and opened the car door, Xiao Yichen was stunned. Uncle. You. How are you so fast? This was the entrance of the bustling city, a street full of delicacies. Usually at this time, there would be a long queue in front of the milk tea shop. It had only been a few minutes, and he had already bought it back. Gong Jie frowned. Is that so? I said I was in a hurry, and the group moved aside. Xiao Yichen couldn't help but feel suspicious. Did you threaten them? No. Gong Fan said coldly, even if he didn't threaten them, just a glance was enough to scare them out of their wits. Gong Jia passed the goji berry tea to Yu Yu and the pudding milk tea to Xiao Yichen. When Hua Jin took the remaining cup, he was surprised to find that it was his favorite matcha flavor. He didn't tell Gong Jia that he liked the matcha flavor. Instead, he said it was up to him. Gong Jia also bought it casually. What's wrong? You don't like this flavor? Hua Jin was stunned and immediately replied, No, I like this flavor. Did you buy it casually? Gong Jia was taken aback as well, and his brows furrowed slightly. At the side, Gong Fan interrupted, Uncle also loves matcha flavor the most. Hua Jin was surprised. You like the matcha flavor too? Yes. Chapter 40-50. Hugging the matcha milk cap, Hua Jin sucked a mouthful of the milk through the straw, feeling completely satisfied. Gong Fan took a sip of wolfberry tea and frowned. He put it aside and stopped drinking. Gong Jia was surprised to see this. What's wrong? There seems to be a lot of saccharin. After a pause, Gong Fan said, It's too sweet. Gong Jia was surprised when he heard this. His gaze became more complicated. I recently took over a patient with multiple personality disorder. Gong Jia sat on the sofa while Alice sat opposite him. She poured tea for him and said calmly, This patient has a total of 6 personalities and each of them is independent. Have you started to study this field? If it weren't for your dear nephew, I wouldn't have taken over this patient. Alice sat down and let out a heavy sigh. In the world, there aren't many patients with multiple personality disorder. The proportion of people with dual personality disorder is also very small. However, most of the more complicated conditions are handled by authoritative research institutions. In short, they are test subjects. These patients have been tortured by multiple personality disorder for a long time and have been controlled. Generally, the root cause of multiple personality disorder is because of self-identity disorder. They lose their sense of self-unity and split into 2 or more different personalities. When one personality appears, the other personalities will automatically withdraw. Generally speaking, the main personality has the advantage. As far as I know, the one with the most classifications in the world is Billy Milliken. Billy? Yes, his story was even filmed into a movie. Back then, he committed the crime of rape in Ohio State University. However, he was diagnosed with a rare case of multiple personality disorder because he was acquitted. Gong Jia nodded. I've heard of this person. This person was the only felon in the history of Country M who was exempted from punishment because of multiple personality disorder. After he committed the crime and was arrested, he didn't know what kind of crime he had committed. He underwent a psychological evaluation and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Alice took a sip of tea and continued, after he was exempted from punishment, he began to undergo a long period of treatment. 2 doctors discovered that he had a total of 24 personalities. However, through treatment, the doctor found that these personality splits are inseparable from his childhood. What do you mean? Billy's mother, Dorothy, grew up on a farm in Ohio. When she grew up, she lived with her husband, Dick. After they divorced, Dorothy moved to Miami and became a singer. There, she lived with a married comedian named Morrison. Dorothy and Morrison had 3 children. Their second son, William, was Billy. After that, a few years later, Morrison died of suicide. Previously, because of gambling debts and alcoholism, he had also committed suicide. After that, Dorothy left Miami with the child and returned to Ohio. Dorothy met Carmo. This man, Carmo, is the key to Billy's schizophrenia. Chapter 4051. Carmo had 2 daughters, one of whom was the same age as Billy. After Dorothy and Carmo got married, Carmo abused Billy for a long time, including raping him. Before that, because of his father's suicide and his mother's multiple remarriages, Billy already had multiple dissociative personalities. His first split personality was a little girl, Christine, when she was 3 years old. Alice had carefully studied Billy's 24 personalities. Among them, the core personality was Billy. He was 26 years old and had brown hair. The second personality, Arthur, was 22 years old and was British. He was rational and cold. He studied physics, chemistry, and medicine by himself. He could even speak Arabic fluently. He was stubborn and conservative and thought of himself as a capitalist. He was the first person to discover the existence of the other personalities. He was in charge of management and decided who would appear to represent the family. He wore glasses. He could speak Arabic? Yes. Gong Jia was baffled by her words. How could different personalities even have different nationalities? Humans were really mysterious creatures. Gong Jia did not know that there were multiple personalities in the past. So far, many strange incidents have been discovered. Some people, who were originally masochistic when they woke up, started to speak authentic Spanish for no reason. After diagnosis, they were also split personalities. Gong Jia finally understood what was going on. In other words, these personalities are all independent entities. The world where personalities exist is unimaginable to us ordinary people. The information we have is also from the oral accounts of the patients. For example, Billy had a split personality when he was 3 years old. When he was 3 years old, he was often called to a corner by the teacher to develop. She was an English little girl. She was smart but suffered from dyslexia. She liked to draw flowers and butterflies. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. These personalities were also oral accounts of the patients. Alice said, "This is the most special thing about Billy. The 24 personalities all liked to draw. These portraits were all drawn by Billy." Gong Jia still felt that it was a little unbelievable. Among so many personalities, there was a personality called Philip. He was 20 years old and had a rough personality. He was from New York and had a strong Brooklyn accent. There was also a personality called Kevin. He was 20 years old and good at scheming. He once planned the robbery of Gray's pharmacy. He liked to write and had blonde hair. In other words, Gong Jia concluded, these 24 personalities were all different. Some were little girls, some were rough men, and some were gentle writers. The 24 personalities each had their own roles and played different roles. However, the outside world could not tell. Only Billy himself knew. Yes. Will there be hallucinations? Alice stared into his eyes carefully and said slowly, "How scary is it when dual personalities and multiple personalities act up? Let's make an analogy and hypothesis. When you're driving, you suddenly realize that you can't remember what happened on the way, or part of it. When you listen to someone talk, you suddenly realize that you can't hear a part or all of what he said. Persistent, severe headache, especially after the above 2 conditions appear. I found myself somewhere, but I don't know how I got here." Chapter 4052. Persistent, severe headaches, especially after the above 2 conditions appear. You realize that you are somewhere, but you don't know how you got here. You realize that you are wearing unfamiliar clothes, but but you don't know how you put them on. Sometimes, you feel that the people, objects, or the world around you are not real. You feel as if you are standing next to yourself and watching yourself do something, or you are watching yourself as if you are observing another person. You face the mirror, but you realize that the person in the mirror is not looking at you, or you don't know yourself. You feel that you are in a familiar place, but you realize that you are very unfamiliar or unfamiliar with it. You are so focused on a fantasy or daydream that you feel as if it is really happening to you. When you are alone, you talk to yourself loudly. You realize that you can't remember if you have done something before. Sometimes, you realize that you are observing the world through a layer of fog. People and objects are very far away from you, and you can't see them clearly. Alice rattled off one item after another. Every one of them was enough to make Gong Jia tremble in fear. Multiple personality disorder was such a terrifying world. Gong Jia's expression could not help but become a little solemn. Is it very difficult to treat? It's very difficult, but it's not impossible. Alice continued, more than 10 years ago, there was a patient with multiple personality disorder in Lima. This patient had a total of 10 personalities, and 3 of them were very brutal and very disobedient. Therefore, the hospital prepared a very cruel electric shock treatment for this disobedient patient. Electric shock? Gong Jia was shocked when he heard that. Isn't that, it's very painful. Alice faced him. In Lima, Billy also received such painful treatment. After the electric shock, Billy was locked up in the most heavily guarded Ward 9. Most of the personalities gave up hope of living and focused on entering the land of death. The land of death? Yes. Once they enter the land of death, these personalities will be cruelly killed, which means that they will sleep forever. However, it is not ruled out that they will wake up again. However, among the 24 personalities, a teacher appeared and took over the body. He was the sum of the 23 personalities, and he had the memories and abilities of all of them. He was unwilling to bow his head to Lima and refused to admit defeat with his death. He wanted to resist and announce Lima's tyranny to the world. He wanted to completely destroy this hell. After that, this personality used his brilliant acting skills and communication skills to convince Lima that he had become obedient enough. Hence, he was transferred from the strictest room, room 9, to the most relaxed room, room 6. Among them, one of the personas wanted to kill the doctor who took over him, but he was stopped by the teacher. This persona of the teacher was the cleverest of the personas. He started to collect evidence of the hospital's illegal activities. Without a pen and paper, he pulled out a cotton ball from inside his blanket. He wet it and started to write under the bed. He stole his ward mate's tape recorder and stuck it into the toilet vent to record the contents of the medical team's meeting. With the evidence of overdose, he threatened to give him a pen, paper, and visitation rights immediately. This personality is really smart. Yes. Chapter 4053. When Gong Jia heard this, he seemed to be deep in thought. Alice changed the topic. I don't have many chances to come into contact with patients like Billy. After all, there are so many patients with multiple personalities. It's really rare. But recently, I got an opportunity to take over a patient. What kind of patient is she? An 18-year-old girl named Lucy. Lucy? She's an Englishwoman who grew up in New York. I've been treating her for 2 months. Then, I found out that her split personality is also related to her childhood. When Gong Jia heard this, he kept quiet and listened carefully to Alice's analysis. 3 years ago, she was sentenced to 80 years in prison because she killed 3 students. However, after the diagnosis, the lawyer overturned the conviction on the grounds that she was suffering from schizophrenia. But, the legal procedures are very strict. Now, the lawyer is still defending her innocence. When Alice talked about Lucy, she seemed to be interested. Actually, putting aside her unfortunate experience, I feel that she's the strangest patient I've ever taken over. To me, taking over such a patient makes me want to find out more. What kind of patient is she? Alice came up with a rough draft in her mind and said tirelessly. When Lucy was young, her mother went through 2 marriages. After that, she married a man who was 3 years older than her. She married him with Lucy. From then on, for 10 years, until she was 15 years old, this man had been abusing Lucy for a long period of time. He even sexually assaulted her. The crime she committed was that she murdered 3 seniors from the same school. After killing them one by one, she threw their bodies into the sea. When the case was in an endless loop, she suddenly turned herself in and said that she had murdered the 3 boys. However, when she turned herself in, she also accused the 3 boys of sexually assaulting her twin sister. However, after the police investigated and collected evidence, they found that her accusation was completely false. After checking her from all aspects and collecting evidence, there was no evidence to prove that the 3 boys had done anything to her twin sister. She had 2 cousins in total, and one of them said that such a thing had never happened. However, Lucy said that the 3 boys had violated her twin sister. But, in fact, she did not have a twin sister. Even so, she still insisted on what she said. Later, during the trial, her defense lawyer requested for a psychiatric evaluation. According to the procedure, after the evaluation, they found that she had multiple personalities. Chapter 4054. Later on, her childhood sweetheart, the detective, saw through this and persuaded her to turn herself in. But later on, she found out that these people did not exist at all. They were all her split personalities. These 3 boys did not do anything to her. However, not long after, a girl from the same school stood up and testified that she was the real victim of these 3 boys. At that time, Lucy was also at the scene. She probably saw this scene with her own eyes, and it triggered the unbearable memories of her youth, which evolved into the final situation. In other words, these were all her fantasies. And during the unbearable torture of her youth, she kept splitting up those personalities. That twin sister was just her unfortunate reflection. She wanted to get rid of the unbearable trauma of her youth, so she wanted to forget all the pain and torture. But the more she tried to forget, the more depressed she felt. So, gradually, she split up a second personality to bear these painful memories. The more Alice said, the more uneasy Gong Jia felt. He had a feeling that Lucy's situation was inexplicably similar to Yu Yu's. When I hypnotized Yu Yu back then, I entered his memory and dug out a lot of painful memories from his memory. Presumably, Gong Fan's personality was Yu Yu's split personality to bear the pain and unbearable memories. Gong Jia muttered to himself in shock. Gong Fan was actually Yu Yu's split personality? Yes. So, Yu Yu felt a lot of guilt towards Gong Fan. Because this personality was created by him to bear the pain. So. Gong Jia followed his words and said, so, Yu Yu was unwilling to destroy him. Yes, Yu Yu is very kind, really kind. After a pause, Alice continued, so, I've been thinking of a way. Yes? I once thought of creating a society with a personality to maintain order. Would this solve the problem? Gong Jia was a little worried when he heard this. You mean, you want to create a 3rd personality or a 4th personality? Yes. No. Gong Jia's attitude was firm. If that's the case, a person's spirit won't be able to withstand it. Create more personalities to form a society of personalities? No, I won't agree. Alice's methods always frightened him. Indeed, this personality society was as shocking as the Sky Eye plan that Yu Yu had proposed. Do you think I'd use Yu Yu as a test subject? Alice laughed it off. No, I won't. I'm going to treat that girl now. If there are no accidents, I'll manage her personality and create a personality society. If this treatment plan works, maybe I can consider it. Gong Jia neither nodded nor denied. He just remained silent. He also wanted to take a gamble. That girl became your test subject? He's not a test subject. Alice shook her head and said, do you know why she's in my hands? Why? Because, everyone is at their wits' end. Chapter 4055. Speaking of electroconvulsive therapy, Gong Jia was a little curious and asked tentatively, what exactly is electroconvulsive therapy? Alice furrowed her brows and continued, do you know why personalities exist? Why? Isn't it because the main personality created them? Alice nodded and said, then do you know why it's so easy to create personalities but so difficult to eliminate them? I don't know. It's because there's almost no difference between the main personality and the secondary personality. Every personality can be seen as an independent entity. Then, since they're no different from ordinary people, and ordinary people don't want to die, why would a personality be willing to be destroyed so easily? Once they exist, once they're created, they'll be like ordinary people. They'll have 7 emotions and 6 desires, independent thoughts and selfishness, and even ambition. Then, gradually, these personalities will want to occupy the main personality. Therefore, it'll cause a lot of mental stress. Back then, Yu's main personality collapsed because of the intense conflict between the 2 personalities. So, Gong Jia sorted out some ideas. That's why it'll cause a lot of mental stress. That's right. Gong Jia gradually understood. In the past, he didn't understand what it was like to have multiple personalities. But after listening to Alice's explanation, he gradually gained a deeper understanding. But do you know why some people choose to commit suicide? Are they normal people? Yes. Because of pain. Alice's tone suddenly became heavier. Because of the indelible pain, whether it's mental or physical, there really is such a pain that makes people want to die. Gong Jia suddenly understood. Electroconvulsive therapy is to let these personalities experience the pain of being born as a human, so they choose to destroy themselves. Yes, bingo. Alice snapped her fingers and her eyes revealed a look of amazement. You seem to have a lot of potential. I don't want to have such a cruel potential. Gong Jia understood. Using electroconvulsive therapy to let each personality experience the pain of being born as a human, then these personalities would start to get tired of the feeling of being a human body. Then, they would choose to go to the land of death. However, the main personality will also suffer this terrible pain. Alice stared deeply into his eyes. Although this pain is also borne by the main personality, no matter how painful it is, it's not fatal. And you also know that the main personality will never die. The ones who die will only be the other personalities. Gong Jia suddenly felt a bone-chilling coldness. Why would they think of such a cruel treatment? Because they're at their wits' end. Alice sighed again. So, in this world, there are too many unknowns. The only people who truly understand the world of schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder are probably only themselves. The reason why the current medical industry had so much amazing information in this field was because most of it came from the oral accounts of these patients. We have no way of telling whether what they say is true or false. Everything in their world is foreign and unknown to us. Chapter 40-56. After a long silence, Alice sighed from the bottom of her heart. I even want to create a second personality in order to cure Yu. At least, I can really explore his world and find the right medicine. Gong Jia was shocked when he heard this. Are you crazy? He had never heard of a doctor deliberately creating a second personality in order to treat a patient with schizophrenia. Is it strange? Aren't scientists all unreasonable lunatics? Gong Jia looked at her strangely. He had always known that Alice was a lunatic. She was a crazy woman. To ordinary people, she might be judged as a cruel woman. When she was sleepy during an autopsy, she would freely drink a bottle of red wine. In the middle of the night, she would study corpses in the morgue. The extent of her obsession with medicine was incomprehensible to ordinary people. In order to cure Yu, she did not hesitate to sacrifice herself. What a joke. Gong Jia said, You're really crazy. Alice, however, did not think much of it. Many professors who have created epic achievements have created so many medical miracles through countless experiments. Some experiments can be replaced by white mice. Some can be replaced by the voluntary donation of the deceased. However, under other circumstances, most scientists will sacrifice themselves and use themselves as experimental subjects. During the war, many experiments were conducted. Although it was cruel, it also contributed a lot of information to human medicine. That's because some diseases can't be cured without several experiments. So, Gong Jie narrowed his eyes. How do you create dual personality? You have to know that not everyone can have dual personality and multiple personality disorder. Dual personality and multiple personality disorder are not ordinary people. However, before they created these personalities, they were actually ordinary people, right? Gong Jie did not want to listen to her fallacious reasoning. Shut up. No matter what, don't mention this matter again in the future. Alice stared deeply into his eyes and sighed helplessly. Then I really don't know what to do. Gong Jie did not say anything else. Uncle, what are you thinking about? At the dining table, Xiao Yichen snapped his fingers when he saw that Gong Jie was in a daze. Gong Jie finally reacted. His eyes regained focus, and his ink-like pupils calmed down. Nothing, I was just daydreaming. On the way back to school from picking up Gong Fan and Xiao Yichen, he suddenly recalled the things that Alice had mentioned to him at the headquarters. His thoughts were heavy all the way. Just like what Alice said, dual personality was really a terrible thing. Yu Yu loved desserts so much, but when it came to Gong Fan, he politely declined all desserts. It was magical, but he also felt heartache. It felt close, but it also felt strange. Now, other than Yu Yu and Gong Fan, everyone had fallen into a vicious cycle. That was, he hoped that Yu Yu's dual personality would be cured and that Gong Fan's second personality would be preserved. Everyone hoped that Yu Yu would be well, but no one wanted Gong Fan to leave. It was really a thorny problem. Gong Jie propped his chin on his hand and gently took a sip of the red wine. Yin Shishir, who was beside him, sized him up silently. She, too, knew what was bothering him. It was probably because of Yu Yu. Chapter 4057. It must be because of Yu Yu. However, Gong Jie did not take the initiative to mention it to her, so it was probably not very optimistic. Yin Shishir did not ask. Although she had been worried about Yu Yu and Gong Fan, it was useless to worry blindly. She might as well let nature take its course and cherish the time she spent with Yu Yu and Gong Fan. Shao Jia, don't let your imagination run wild. Eat a piece of steak. Gong Jia came back to his senses and hummed in acknowledgement. Who cooked this steak? Me. Gong Jia seemed to have discovered a new world. You know how to cook steak? Of course. Yin Shishir rolled her eyes. I should learn how to cook. Yu Yu seems to have disappeared for 2 days. Gong Jia asked again, where's Gong Fan? Yin Shishir said, he's finished eating. He's in the study. Oh. Gong Jia suddenly recalled Alice's words. Actually, I've been thinking about how to coexist with 2 personalities. Do you know? If Gong Fan leaves Yu Yu's body, he will definitely take away all those dark memories. However, the uneasiness and guilt will forever remain in Yu Yu's heart. He has always felt that he owed Yu Yu. His disappearance will cause Yu Yu to completely break down. Was that really the case? Gong Jia felt inexplicably frustrated. In the study. Gong Fan lay on the table and slept for a short while. When he opened his eyes again, they had regained their clarity. Yu Yu raised his head and looked around. Just as he was about to get up, he suddenly noticed a blue notebook beside him. He raised his eyebrows inexplicably and looked around again. Seeing that he was alone in the study, he opened the notebook thoughtfully. When he woke up, he did not know where he was or what he should do. His memories seemed to have stopped 2 days ago. He knew nothing about what had happened to Gong Fan in the past 2 days. It was precisely because of this predicament that he was at a loss. He flipped open the notebook and saw that it was completely different from his, but he recognized Gong Fan's handwriting at a glance. It was written in red pen. Clear and dazzling. In the future, we will use this method to contact each other. Yu Yu swept a glance at it, and his pink lips curled up slightly. He understood everything at a glance. It looked like a notepad, but it was more detailed than a notepad. February 1st, at night, lying in bed, I suddenly felt very uneasy. I felt like I was a burden, so I told Mommy about my uneasiness. She gave me a kiss and told me that I was an inseparable part of her. I was very happy. Although the words seemed cold, you could feel Gong Fan's suppressed joy from the words. February 2nd, today, Qinger seems to be more enthusiastic towards me than before. Is it because of your appearance? However, I'm not good at talking to girls. She probably thinks that I'm a little lonely and disappointed. In the afternoon, Li Siqing published the love letter she wrote to you to the other classmates and made her cry. How troublesome. I don't know how to deal with such things. In the future, don't create such trouble for me. The wolfberry tea Gong Jia bought is too sweet. It tastes terrible. Xiao Yichen thought that you were back, so he said bad things about me. Idiot. I feel inexplicably anxious and sleepy. I want to sleep, but I'm afraid that if I fall asleep, the one who wakes up won't be me. However, it's okay. At least there's still a place for me. Chapter 40-58. Do you like to drink cola and milk tea? It's too troublesome. It's not good to eat too sweet. The more you read these words, the more he laughed. Gong Fan had such an adorable side to him. Could they communicate through the notepad? That was quite convenient. Why hadn't he thought of such a method before? Yu stretched lazily when the door suddenly opened. Little Yichen poked his head in. When Yu saw that it was him, he suddenly thought of a naughty idea. His lips curled up wickedly as he pretended to be solemn, just like Gong Fan's aloof look. What's wrong? He imitated Gong Fan's cold tone. Sure enough, Little Yichen believed him. He walked in with trepidation, cleared his throat, and said gently, "It's getting late, it's time to sleep. Have you made your bed?" "Yes, it's done." Little Yichen's eyes darted around. "I just finished showering, and I'm already fragrant." Yu stood up slowly and walked in front of Xiao Yichen. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Let me smell you." Xiao Yichen immediately stood up straight and opened his arms for him to smell. Yu had a serious obsession with cleanliness. Sometimes, when Xiao Yichen came home from school and finished his homework, he would let himself loose. He would either pester Gong Jia, Hua Jin, or Lisa to play tennis. When he came home at night, he would be drenched in sweat. Gong Fan and Yu were obsessed with cleanliness and despised him. Hence, they would urge him to take a shower every night and watch him apply body lotion before entering the room. As a result, Little Yichen gradually developed the habit of bathing and showering every day. He even had the habit of applying body lotion after showering. He wasn't so particular in the past. It was all because of his younger brother. Xiao Yichen sized up Yu and felt that he was very obedient. Although they were the same person, they were still two separate personalities. No matter how they acted, they wouldn't look alike. He could not help but mutter strangely, "Are you really Gong Fan?" Yu found it funny, but she held it in. "Who do you think I am?" "I think you look like Yu." Xiao Yichen tapped his head, feeling a headache coming on. Yu and Gong Fan could not tell the difference. Sometimes, Gong Fan suddenly changed back. If he accidentally said something bad about Gong Fan, that would be terrible. You found out. Yu couldn't be bothered to hide it. He didn't know why, but as long as he was in front of Gong Fan, Xiao Yichen would become unusually nervous. He couldn't bear to tease him. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he suddenly realized what was going on. "You're Yu." "Yes. You tricked me." Xiao Yichen complained pitifully, "How could you do that?" Yu laughed and patted his head. "All right, I won't tease you anymore. Don't be angry." Xiao Yichen crossed his arms in front of his chest, looking proud. He looked like he wanted to be comforted and hugged. Yu quickly reached out and hugged him. "All right, brother, be good. Don't be angry." Xiao Yichen was satisfied when he heard this. He grunted. "Don't do it again." "Okay, I know." "Oh yes, Something happened this afternoon. Xiao Yichen was about to tell him about Qinger when you immediately reacted. Are you talking about Qinger? Eh. Xiao Yichen looked as if he had seen a ghost. How did you know? He was instantly alarmed. You couldn't have known. Could it be that he was Gong Fan? Chapter 40-59. Alright, stop making wild guesses and don't bother about how I found out. Anyway, I'm clear about this matter. The way he communicated with Gong Fan was a secret. Even if it was Mommy, he wouldn't tell her. This was a secret that only belonged to them. Is Uncle around? Yes, he's on the balcony on the second floor. What's the matter? You said, you can go back to your room first. I have some matters to discuss with him. With that, Yu walked up to the second floor. When he reached the second floor, he bumped into Gong Jia, who was about to go downstairs. When Gong Jia saw him, he sized him up for a while until he could tell that he was Yu and not Yu. Then, he tried to greet him. Yu? Yes. Yu's eyes turned into crescents. Uncle is very smart to recognize me. He won't smile like you. Gong Jia paused and immediately corrected him. He doesn't like to smile much. Is that so? Gong Jia nodded. Actually, it was very easy to distinguish between the two personalities. Gong Fan's personality was cold and indifferent, and it emanated from his bones. On the other hand, Yu's warmth, even if it was just a look, could make people feel very warm from the bottom of their hearts. This kind of feeling couldn't be changed at all. It was just that in the past, he didn't realize it. He just found it strange. How could a child be so smart? He pretended to be so obedient in front of Yun Shishir, but in fact, he was a terrifying child. He was very shrewd, but in front of her, he acted so innocent. It was just that back then, he didn't expect that Yu had a split personality. If he had noticed this, he would have handed Yu over to Alice immediately. It wouldn't have been delayed until now. Are you looking for me? Yes. Gong Jia was a little curious. Why are you looking for me? Gong Fan wants me to tell you that no matter what you buy for him next time, it has to be sweet. He doesn't like it if it's too sweet. That's all? Gong Jia broke out in cold sweat. Of course not. Yu walked to the railing of the balcony and leaned against it lazily. She enjoyed the night breeze and gently closed her eyes. Gong Jia walked behind him and looked at his back. After a while, he came to his side and leaned against the fence with him. Uncle and nephew, just like that, faced the night breeze. The wind at night was a little cold. Coupled with the drop in temperature at night, it occasionally became a little sharp. Gong Jia felt a little cold, so she asked, "Aren't you cold?" Yu shook her head and narrowed her eyes. She seemed to be enjoying herself. Gong Jia complained, "Did you run up here just to drag me along with you in the cold wind? There are many things that I want to tell you, but when I close my eyes, I suddenly forget them. You're not that old yet. How did your memory become so bad?" Yes, maybe I'm old. When Gong Jia heard this, he was dealt a huge blow. If you're old, then won't I be ascending? Isn't it good to be exposed to the cold wind? You'll be more awake when it's cold. Gong Jia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's already so late. It's time to sleep, but you're telling me that you want to be more awake? I don't want to sleep. Yu was actually very sleepy, but he didn't want to waste any time on sleep. He wanted to be more awake. Even if he had to lean against the balcony to enjoy the cold wind and look at the night sky, it was better than closing his eyes. Chapter 40-60. What kind of unorthodox saying is that? Yu smiled. Someone else said it. Gong Jia disagreed. Then have you heard of this saying? Go ahead. Gong Jia said, you can only live longer if you sleep early. You can easily die if you sleep late. Yu nodded. This saying is very pertinent and also very scientific. Gong Jia turned around and leaned against the fence. Suddenly, he asked seriously, can Gong Fan hear what I'm saying now? He can't. In other words, no matter what I say to you, he won't hear it? Yu nodded. Of course. It's very strange. How is it strange? Gong Jia narrowed his eyes. He couldn't tell. In the past, you had dual personality, but the difference wasn't so obvious. Yu was stunned for a moment and quickly understood what he meant. In the past, his personality was controlled by me. Rather than saying that I controlled it, it was because I didn't realize his existence at all. When he appeared, I still had a vague memory. I also vaguely knew what he did and said. I was just curious why I couldn't control myself, but I didn't know what was wrong with me. I only knew that sometimes, I often couldn't control myself to do some things and say some things. I also know about that world-shaking, Heaven's Eye project. Gong Jia nodded. Then why couldn't you control yourself in the end? Yu continued, Alice hypnotized me. She entered my hypnotic world and discovered my second personality. Actually, erasing my memory was just hypnotizing my first personality and sealing it. From then on, my second personality was completely out of control. I also tried to suppress it. However, it gradually got out of control. Gong Jia was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he asked with a serious expression, actually, there is a treatment plan. Gong Fan is willing to sleep and go to the land of the dead. Are you willing to? I'm not willing. Yu interrupted him. Although it was an understatement, one could vaguely see that he was trembling. Gong Jia couldn't bear to see him like this. Actually, I used to hate him very much. However, later on, I realized that I was the one who created his birth. I forced all the memories related to pain onto him. Only then could I be at ease. He, on the other hand, has always been shouldering so much. He is also a part of me. Why do I have to destroy him? Gong Jia was still silent. Yu sized him up, and the light in his eyes dimmed. I know you're worried about me, thank you. Gong Jia ruffled his hair in disdain. Why are you being so courteous with me? You're not cute. Yu blushed and felt a little helpless. Do I have to think about something so far away now? Of course. Actually, it's not far away at all. Humans have 7 emotions and 6 desires. When you enter your teenage years and have feelings, it's inevitable that there will be a girl you like. If he doesn't like her and rejects her, what will you do? Yu obviously didn't take it to heart. It's hard for me to imagine liking someone. Do I have to live with my wife after getting married? What else? Chapter 4061. It's hard for me to imagine falling in love with someone. Do I have to live with my wife after I get married? What else? Gong Jia asked, do you want to stick to your mommy for the rest of your life? Yu hesitated for a moment before replying, if daddy doesn't mind. He'll definitely mind. Who doesn't want to be alone? It was rare for Gong Jia to take Mu Yaja's side and think about it. Don't tell me you'll become a mommy's boy when you grow up. I don't know. Isn't a mommy's boy good? Mommy's boy is despised. If you act like this, it'll inevitably cause a fight between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Yu's lips twitched. Uncle, you're not even married yet. Why are you thinking about what will happen after I get married? Gong Jia snorted coldly and said disapprovingly, I'm just worried about you. Uncle, don't worry about me. It's better for you to worry about your own life. When Gong Jia heard this, he smiled indifferently. I think it's more comfortable to be alone. I'm not interested in women. Oh. When Yu heard this, he couldn't help but feel a little gossipy. So you're really into men? Gong Jia frowned and glanced at him. You seem to be very nosy about my love life. Get over it. Don't care about what the world thinks. Yu patted him on the shoulder like an old man and consoled him, society is very open now. It's not uncommon for men to like men. Love is free. You can fall in love even if you're of the same gender. Gong Jia's eyelids twitched again. It was really hard to imagine that such words would come out of the mouth of a 10-year-old child. It felt very out of place. Gong Jia suddenly changed the topic. Alice recently took in a girl. Like you, she has multiple personality disorder. She's 18 years old. It's said that she plans to study this girl's illness and delve into this field. When Yu heard this, he was a little surprised. Multiple personality disorder? Yes. Can I see her? Gong Jia raised his eyebrows. Why do you want to see her? Can't I? Yu pouted, feeling wronged. Gong Jia couldn't persuade him. Okay, I'll take you there when you're on vacation. Yes. Yu paused and suddenly shushed Gong Jia mysteriously. Don't tell Gong Fan about this, in case he gets sensitive. Got it. The girl named Lucy mentioned by Alice was being held in Miami's Michelle Hospital. The reason why she was imprisoned was because there was a violent personality in Lucy's personality. Therefore, Lucy was once seen as a dangerous person and was heavily monitored, completely losing her personal freedom. Before Alice took over, Lucy was a patient of Professor Romanka. Professor Romanka was a textbook in the field of psychology and psychiatry. He was also an honorary professor at Michelle Hospital. His attainments in the field of psychiatry and psychology were regarded as authoritative. Lucy was being held in Michelle Hospital and was ordered to refuse all visits. If it weren't for her relationship with Alice, it would be impossible to see her. Before flying to Miami, Alice repeatedly warned Gong Jia not to reveal that Yu had multiple personality disorder when he met Professor Romanka. This guy is crazy. You have to be careful. Although Gong Jia didn't know why Alice warned him, he agreed unconditionally. Chapter 4062. Alice did not dare to divulge anything. She was afraid that it would be detrimental to Yu if it got out. However, when Gong Jia and Yu arrived at Michelle Hospital, for some reason, Yu felt his eyelids twitch violently when he got out of the car and saw the grand entrance of the hospital. He felt a little uneasy. This hospital gave him a very oppressive feeling. It was like a prison. Children were especially sensitive. Especially children like Yu. In short, this hospital left a bad first impression on him. He could not put his finger on it. He felt that this hospital was eerie. It's like a haunted house. Yu muttered. Gong Jia laughed when he heard that. Instead of calling it a hospital, it's more like Professor Romanka's private research center. Research center? Yu could not help but feel a chill run down his spine when he heard that. What does it research? Of course, it's research on people with multiple personality disorder like Lucy. This Professor Romanka, don't tell me he's experimenting on Lucy and those patients with multiple personality disorder? Anyway, according to Alice, Professor Romanka's methods are appalling. He was also the one who advocated electroconvulsive therapy. However, because it was too cruel and inhumane, it was banned. Yu suddenly sympathized with Lucy. They walked through a long corridor and could not see the end of it. There was a row of floor-to-ceiling windows with colorful church-style prints. It seemed to be related to the mysterious religion of Zong. For some reason, the bright colors were more oppressive than the black and white pictures. Yu held Gong Jia's hand tightly. He felt inexplicably uneasy. He was the one who suggested to take a look, but now he felt like retreating. Gong Jia sensed his uneasiness and held his hand tightly. The warmth of his palm gave him a sense of security. Are you afraid? Gong Jia was a little surprised. Yu nodded and then shook his head. He seemed a little conflicted. He kept turning his head and staring at the floor-to-ceiling window. Suddenly, Alice's words came from behind him. Don't stare at the window. Gong Jia and Yu were startled. They turned around and saw Alice in a white coat walking towards them. Don't stare at the patterns on the window, she said. Why? Yu was the first to question, is there something wrong with the window? Alice smiled and asked, don't you feel uncomfortable staring at it? Yu was stunned. You must be asking me, how would I know? Yes. Indeed. Staring at the paintings on the glass, Yu did feel a little uncomfortable, even oppressed. Don't you think this scene is very familiar? Alice touched his head. Yu Yu shook his head and pondered for a moment. It does feel very familiar, but I can't remember. It is said that this is a world drawn by one of Lucy's personalities. What do you mean? Alice explained. She said that these paintings are the scenes of the land of death. Yu Yu was startled for a moment as he suddenly recalled it. No wonder he felt oppressed when he stared at these paintings. Chapter 4063. Does Lucy know how to draw? Yes, she knows how to draw. After Professor Romanka discovered this talent of hers, he nurtured her diligently and guided her to draw the world that is unknown to the world. Alice walked to his side and lowered her voice. You shouldn't have come to this place. Yu Yu felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. He didn't know why, but his back was unknowingly covered in cold sweat. Alice said to Gongjia, I'll take you to the office first. Wait for me there for a while. I still have something to talk to Professor Romanka about. When I'm done with my work, I'll come and find you. Gongjia raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? Alice sighed. Professor Romanka doesn't seem to be willing to let her go. Lucy? Yes. Alice nodded. He wants to continue his research on her and can't bear to give her to me. I'm still communicating with him. This old man always goes back on his words. What a headache. She brought Gongjia and Yu Yu to a room and told them to stay in the room and not go anywhere. Yu Yu sat down on the sofa and looked around. This was a very large room. There was a desk, 2 stools, a row of sofas, and a row of bookshelves. Other than that, there was no other decoration. Many abstract paintings were pasted on the snow-white walls. The colors were warm and made people feel comfortable. Gongjia looked at these paintings and suddenly said, once the patient enters this room, these paintings will start to give him a psychological suggestion. Psychological suggestion? Yes. Gongjia sat down on the sofa. Seeing that Yu Yu had a strong desire to explore psychological suggestions, he said, someone did such an experiment. A death row prisoner was brought to a room and blindfolded. Then, his limbs were tightly bound. At this time, a doctor used a scalpel and made a shallow cut on his wrist. Blood flowed out. There was a basin beside his hand. Although it was bleeding, it wasn't fatal. However, the doctor opened the cap of the 4-drip bottle, and the water dripped down the tube into the basin drop by drop. At first, the prisoner on death row had a relaxed expression, but as time passed, he began to cry in pain. He began to struggle, and he began to fear death. He thought that the dripping sound was the sound of his blood draining away. He began to complain of a headache, vomiting, and his nerves were tense. And then? Later on, he really died. Yu Yu was speechless. How can that be? Scared to death? No. Parasympathetic rebound caused cardiac arrest. Gongjia continued, when the patient enters such a room and sees these paintings, they begin to be hypnotized and gradually let down their guard. So it's like that. Yu Yu suddenly felt that doctors were very scary. Gongjia saw through his thoughts at a glance. Do you think it's scary? A little. That's right. Don't find a wife who studies medicine in the future. He was actually in the mood to make such a cold joke. Yu Yu did not sit still. He stood up and walked around the ward. Then, he walked to the office desk and sat down on the leather chair. When he sat down, he vaguely saw a dark shadow under the desk. Yu Yu looked at the edge of the bed and saw a snow-white shirt through the light. He was so shocked that he stood up immediately. When Gongjia saw this, he walked towards him vigilantly. Chapter 4064. He was so shocked that he stood up immediately. Under the table, there was a mass of dark shadows. It felt like a person was hiding under the table. Who's there? Yu Yu stared at the shadow warily. When Gongjia saw this, he walked towards him warily. What's the matter? Yu Yu said to him, someone's hiding under the table. Upon hearing this, Gongjia also became alert. He glanced at the shadow and said coldly, who's down there? Shoo! A childish voice came from under the table. You could vaguely tell that the voice belonged to a 7 or 8-year-old girl. A little girl? There was someone in the room? Gong Jia was also very surprised. When he and Yu entered the room, although they didn't pay much attention, with his vigilance, he wouldn't have only noticed if there was someone in the room. This girl was hiding there. Even her breathing was very light. Yu didn't let his guard down just because it was a child's voice. He casually pulled the curtains open and looked around. The shadows were dispelled. Under the sunlight, a little girl in a white lace one-piece nightgown hugged her knees and squatted under the table. When she saw Yu pull the curtains open, she, who was used to the darkness, instinctively covered her eyes with her hands. She wasn't frightened, but the sunlight was too glaring. Her body shrank into a ball. At first glance, she looked like a furry snow rabbit. Her dark chestnut hair was slightly curled like seaweed, covering her small back. Such beautiful hair, but wrapped around a small face. Under the sunlight, her snow-white porcelain doll skin was even more obvious. It was clean, like a congealed cream, without a trace of impurities. Her face was too small. Her hands weren't big to begin with. When she used her hands to cover her eyes, half of her face was covered. When she gradually got used to the light, the girl finally put down her hands carefully. However, when Yu saw her violet eyes, he was stunned. This little snow rabbit's eyes were pure violet. It was too rare. Purple eyes were rare in this world. The girl's facial features were exquisite and deep. Although she hadn't fully matured yet, one could vaguely see that she had a three-dimensional silhouette. Her ancestors must be of mixed Eurasian origin. The color of the pupils was related to the human race. The further north a race went, the shorter the amount of sunlight they received. As a result, the amount of melanin in their bodies decreased. Therefore, their pupils, skin color, and hair color became lighter. Most Asians had brown pupils, Africans had black pupils, and Europeans had blue, gray, and green pupils. However, purple was a relatively rare color in the world. There were very few people with purple irises. This color had nothing to do with genetic mutations, and it was not considered unhealthy. However, most people with purple irises were Eurasian. The girl was very beautiful, especially her pair of purple eyes that were like precious gems. When she blinked her eyes, they sparkled. Gong Jia was also a little surprised. He also saw the girl's purple eyes and was shocked. This could be said to be an extraordinary pupil. Yu frowned and pursed his lips. Before he could say anything, the girl immediately realized and shushed him. Don't let her find out that I'm here. Chapter 4065. Her. Yu could not help but be suspicious. He thought that the girl was referring to Alice or Romanka. Could such a beautiful girl be Professor Romanka's patient? He and Gong Jia looked at each other, feeling incredulous at once. Yu could not help feeling curious about her. His interest was piqued as he squatted down to her eye level and looked into her bright purple eyes. What's your name? The little snow bunny tilted her head and revealed a friendly smile. She said softly, Natalia. Natalia? What a nice and special name. Yu nodded and said, My name is Yu. The little snow bunny felt a little strange when she heard that. She muttered, I didn't ask for your name. Yu did not know whether to laugh or cry when he heard that. This little girl was too cute. Yu pretended to be sad. Don't you want to know my name? The little snow bunny shook her head gently. No. Why? Because I don't know you. The little snow bunny was not as friendly as Yu. She was still curled up in a small corner. Obviously, she did not want to talk to him. Don't talk to me. Otherwise, she will definitely find out about me. Find out about you? Yu was getting more and more curious. Who? Alice? The little snow bunny ignored him. She hugged her knees and squatted in the corner. If one did not look carefully, she really looked like a furry snow bunny. What a strange girl. Just as Yu was feeling puzzled, Alice opened the door and walked in. She looked around and saw Yu and Gong Jia standing by the bed. She asked without much hope, "Did you see a 7 or 8-year-old girl with chestnut-colored hair?" A girl? Gong Jia instinctively glanced under the table when he heard that. Alice did not catch his subtle glance. She continued, "Yes, I think you didn't see her either. It's strange. The surveillance camera showed that she came here, but it didn't capture her after she turned a corner. This is a blind spot. A living person just disappeared into thin air." Yu guessed that Alice was looking for her and that Natalia was hiding from Alice. He looked at Natalia, but she kept winking at him with her hands clasped together. She was obviously begging him not to reveal her hiding place. Yu was quick to react. Alice saw him staring at the bottom of the table. She could not help but become suspicious. She walked over and followed his gaze. When she saw Natalia, she saw her. When she saw her, she saw Natalia, and saw Natalia's eyes. "You's, too. So you're here, Natalia. I've been looking for you for a long time." Alice pinched the tip of her nose, but Natalia slapped her hand away unhappily. She pouted angrily and glared at Yu. She was obviously blaming him for revealing her hiding place. Yu felt a little wronged. He did not reveal it. "Are you playing hide and seek?" Alice nodded. "Yes, I guess so. I'm taking her back to the ward now." When Natalia heard that they were going back to the ward, her smile disappeared. She threw a tantrum. "I don't want to go back to the ward." Chapter 4066. Yu was a little surprised to hear that. "Is she your patient?" Alice shook her head and said, "She is Professor Romanka's daughter." Daughter? She didn't look like one. She didn't look like one at all. As an Asian, she looked at foreigners with the same face. But Yu could tell. Professor Romanka had an aquiline nose and a well-defined face. He looked like a typical European man. Natalia, on the other hand, didn't look like she was of European descent. Her skin wasn't sickly pale either. "Wait for me here. I'll be right back." With that, Alice carried Natalia out of the room. Through the window, Yu caught sight of his mother's gloomy expression. Her eyes were tinged with worry, and it was clear that she was very resistant to the idea. He was determined to get to the bottom of this. So, when Alice came back, he went straight to the point. "Natalia isn't Professor Romanka's biological daughter, right?" Alice was obviously a little surprised. She didn't bring him to meet Professor Romanka officially. How did he know? Yu saw her suspicion and explained, "There is a portrait of him in the hospital. It says that he is Professor Romanka. It should be his photo, right?" Alice was surprised. "I didn't expect you to be so observant. So, she's really not his biological daughter?" Gong Jia looked on coldly. His nephew seemed to be especially sad about that girl. Love at first sight? First awakening of love? Yu didn't notice Gong Jia's meaningful look. He said seriously, "She seems to be very unhappy. She has been avoiding you." Alice said helplessly, "Because she refuses to go back to the ward." "She's a patient?" "I guess so." "Guess so?" Yu wasn't satisfied with this vague explanation. "Your explanation is too far-fetched. You seem to care about her a lot." Alice also noticed this. Natalia is indeed very beautiful, just like a porcelain doll. Don't change the topic. All right. Alice immediately raised her hands in surrender and replied, "She's an orphan. She was adopted by Professor Romanka when she was 3 years old. At that time, Natalia was just an ordinary little girl. But now, she's just like you." Yu blurted out, "Do you have dual personality disorder?" If she was like him, wouldn't that mean she had a split personality? Alice nodded. Yes. Suddenly, she pondered for a moment and decided to tell the truth. However, her other personality was cultivated by Professor Ramaga. Nurture? Not to mention Yu, even Gong Jia was surprised. Can one's personality be cultivated? Gong Jia was also suspicious. Previously, Alice had mentioned this idea. However, at that time, he thought it was just an idea. He didn't expect that personalities could really be cultivated. For a patient with dual personality disorder, the other personality is originally a split from the main personality and cultivated. Just like you. Gong Fan's personality was also cultivated subconsciously in your heart. Therefore, if the main personality can be cultivated, the outside world can also cultivate it. Was that so? Could a normal person also cultivate a second personality through cultivation? Chapter 4067. When Yu heard this, his face turned cold. Can I take it that Professor Romanka adopted her to use her as a test subject? Alice hesitated for a moment. Not all of it. Not all of it? Yes, Professor Romanka never had a child in his life. He found Natalia in the orphanage, so he adopted her as his daughter. Later, he was too obsessed with this field and wanted to conquer it, so he did not hesitate to use Natalia as a test subject. Yu's eyes turned even colder. Don't you think this is cruel? Science is very cruel. Their existence is to find and conquer the difficult problems in this field. They don't care about ethics and morals. I also said that most of us are crazy. Just like the Hurricane Group, the world thinks that Hurricane Group is the cause of war, and they also think that the Hurricane Group is cruel. But isn't the real cruelty the deep-rooted ambition of human beings? Alice's words made Yu a little angry, but he was speechless. She was right. Humans were cruel and selfish. Scientists were not philanthropists. They would do anything to achieve their goals. No wonder when she heard the footsteps, especially when she heard Alice's voice, Natalia felt as if she was facing a great enemy. No one wanted to be locked in such a cold and miserable ward. For some reason, Yu felt especially sorry for her. Maybe he had the same memory as Natalia. When he was young, he was locked in a snow-covered ward, unable to see the sun. He felt that the world was cold. For some reason, Yu felt a little depressed. Alice could tell that he felt sorry for Natalia. I am negotiating with Professor Romanka now. Alice squatted in front of him and said gently, I have discussed with him. Lucy will stay by his side and I will take care of Natalia. Really? Yu widened his eyes. Professor Romanka is willing? What do you think? Alice smiled. Dual personality disorder and multiple personality disorder are two completely different fields. Professor Ramaga is obviously more interested in multiple personality disorder. Multiple personality disorder was definitely the result of a split personality, but a split personality did not necessarily result in multiple personality disorder. In terms of the value of the test subject, it was obvious that Lucy was better. Although Natalia was his daughter, they weren't related by blood, and their relationship wasn't that deep. At least for that lunatic, academic achievements were definitely more important. That's why I'm confident that the negotiations will be successful. This way, I'll be able to bring Natalia back. Yu frowned slightly. Gong Jia asked with concern, did you bring Natalia back for research? When Yu heard this, she was instantly alarmed. Really? He immediately thought of the horrifying and cruel human experimentation. Alice didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You two are singing the same tune. I haven't said anything yet. Why are you both glaring at me so fiercely? Am I that crazy in your eyes? Yu didn't think much of it. Don't you think you're crazy? Gong Jia added, you're no better than Professor Romanka. A woman who always talked about dissection. A woman who could stand in the dissection room and elegantly taste red wine. Chapter 4068. Alice wanted to cry but had no tears. She felt that in the eyes of Yu and Gong Jia, she had become the representative of the devil. However, was she really that scary? Although there were some twists and turns in the process, Yu still managed to see Lucy as he wished. She was locked up in a ward. Although it was said that she was receiving humanitarian treatment, she was no different from a criminal. Yu saw that there were all kinds of surveillance cameras installed in the ward. There were 2 in one corner and more than 10 in the whole room. It could be said that they were monitoring her from all directions. Yu guessed that there might be surveillance cameras installed in the washroom as well. Professor Romanka would not let go of any blind spots to observe Lucy's every word and action. In the ward, there was a door that isolated Lucy from the outside world. There was a window on the door with a metal grill. Through the grill, Yu saw Lucy sitting in front of the study table alone, quietly drawing. From this perspective, Lucy was no different from a normal person. In fact, people with multiple personality disorder usually looked no different from a normal person. However, Yu knew that people with multiple personality disorder were completely different from normal people. Who is she now? Gong Jia asked curiously and lowered his voice. Alice shook her head. After looking for a while, she was also confused. If she is drawing, she should be Lucy. She likes drawing very much. Usually, when she has nothing to do, she will quietly draw by herself. Oh. Yu did not feel good. He was glad that he was protected by so many people. Be it his daddy, mommy, Gong Jia, Xiao Yichen and Lisa, they were all protecting him with all their hearts. Back then, for some reason, a professor knew about his condition. He was a famous psychiatrist in London and wanted to bring him over to study his condition. Yun Shishir vehemently disagreed. At that time, the professor was sincere and repeatedly emphasized that if it was delayed, he was worried that his condition would worsen. However, Yun Shishir's attitude was even more unyielding. On the surface, Tongning did not reveal her intentions. But, deep down, she knew that even though this professor claimed to be researching Yu's condition for his own good, his motives were not pure. He simply wanted to use Yu to complete his research. Yun Shishir was very determined. Even if her condition worsened, she did not want Yu to be like those patients with multiple personality disorder who were imprisoned by the hospital like prisoners. Every day, they faced the snow-white world without any freedom. Yu had experienced this kind of helplessness and loneliness since she was young. She didn't want Yu to face it again. Mu Yaja was also very protective of Yu. Whether it was Yu's personality or Gong Fan's personality, he treated them all the same. He firmly believed that even if Gong Fan's personality wasn't the main personality, he was still a part of Yu. They were both his son. Lucy had been locked up here for a long time. Originally, she only had 5 personalities. But now, she had 10 personalities. As for the other 5 personalities, they were not split from her body. Professor Romanka had used hypnosis to create a dream for her. Furthermore, the split personality was completed in the dream. Chapter 4069. Professor Romanka took an unconventional approach. He created a police personality and kept hypnotizing that personality. He wanted to urge that personality to destroy all of Lucy's bad personalities. Destroy all of them? When Yu heard this, he felt a chill run down his spine. How? Professor Romanka is preparing an experiment. An experiment? Yes. Alice explained, he wants to gather all the personalities together through the dream. Then, he will awaken the personality that represents the police and make it a part of the main body. He will also tell her to kill the few evil and negative personalities and leave behind the only good main personality. If this experiment is successful, then he will definitely achieve absolute academic results in the field of multiple personalities. Too selfish. Yu frowned. What's the difference between this and killing people? Alice was silent for a while. I agree with this idea, but I don't agree with his method. I also think that this method is too cruel. Moreover, it treats the symptoms but not the root cause. Today, he can use the good personality to kill the bad personality. How can he prevent the good personality from becoming bad? How can he prevent a new bad personality from splitting? I have argued with him, but he is stubborn. I can't persuade him. So, Lucy will become a test subject? Alice nodded and smiled. I can't help you even if I want to. After all, I'm not an authority in this academic field. I have no right to speak. Moreover, Lucy is also a patient he took over. I can't interfere with his treatment. Yu suddenly became alert. If his experiment is successful, then, will you repeat this experiment on me? Alice was speechless and said helplessly, if I use you as an experiment, your uncle will definitely tear me into pieces. Gong Jia expressed that he was implicated. Am I that scary? You're scarier than I said. Alice said tactfully, if I dare to use this treatment plan on your biological nephew, you will definitely let me die without a burial place. Not to that extent. Gong Jia's expression was nonchalant. Because you don't dare to either. Alice could not help but laugh when she heard that. She glanced at Yu and shrugged. Look. Yu covered her mouth and giggled. This uncle of mine is still quite protective of me at critical moments. Gong Jia rubbed his head in annoyance. That's right. Shouldn't I protect you when it's not critical? Ingrate. All right. Uncle is the best. After being praised by Yu, Gong Jia could not help but feel smug. Is uncle better or daddy better? Both are fine, Yu answered ambiguously. Gong Jia did not give up and continued to ask another question. If you were given two choices, play with your uncle or play with your daddy, which one would you choose? He seemed to be deliberately making things difficult for her. Only a resentful woman would ask such a question. Alice said coldly, is this a question that only divorced people ask about their children? Gong Jia said arrogantly, why? Can't I ask? As he said that, he looked at Yu expectantly. Yu pondered for a long time and finally answered honestly, Daddy is fine. Why? Gong Jia looked hopeless. How was he inferior to Muyaja? Chapter 40-70. Oh, my God. This was a critical hit. How could they bully him like this? Critical hit. This was the highest level of public display of affection that Gong Jia had ever seen. How could you bully him like this? Alice could not stand it anymore. You're just shooting your uncle in the heart. Gong Jia clutched his heart and expressed his sadness. You're hurting my heart. Alice smiled and suddenly raised her wrist to look at the time. Realizing that it was getting late, she said, all right, I still have something to do here. This hospital has a huge back garden. You guys can take a stroll around. I'll fight with Professor Romenka for Natalia's custody. With that, she left. Gong Jia felt bored staying here, so he wanted to take a stroll in the back garden. Yu agreed. He had come this time to see what kind of treatment plan was for his dissociative identity disorder, but ever since he entered this hospital, he had only felt endless depression. Initially, he wanted to consider whether to accept treatment, but now, it seemed that he had to give up immediately. I don't want Gong Fan to disappear. Yu said truthfully, if he disappears, I'm probably not a complete me. Gong Jia agreed. I also think that the treatment plan so far is not suitable for you. However, don't worry. No matter how bad the situation is, there will be a way out. You don't have to worry too much. Yu frowned as he felt a headache coming on. I just feel that my mental state has been a little bad recently. What's wrong? I keep feeling like I can't wake up. I go to bed early, but when I wake up, I still feel very tired. Moreover, the symptoms of memory loss are becoming more and more obvious. Memory loss? Yes. In the past, I might have vaguely understood what happened to Gong Fan's personality, but now that his personality is becoming more and more independent, the two personalities have drawn a clear line. After I become me, I have no idea what happened before. When Gong Jia heard this, his originally relaxed brows knitted again. Don't worry first. I'll ask Alice later. There should be ways to suppress these. Yes. Yu saw a swing in the garden, so he walked over and sat on it. Gong Jia raised his eyebrows when he saw him sitting on the swing. Aren't you going to take a walk? No, I'll sit here for a while. You go walk around. Okay. Wait for me here. I'll be back soon. As Gongjia said so, he walked around the small path and strolled around the back garden. He preferred gardening. He had invested in real estate all over the world, whether it was villas or bungalows, but gardening had to be of the highest standard. It had to be said that the interior of Michelle Hospital was worlds apart from a garden. The environment in the hospital was so depressing, but the back garden was unbelievably beautiful. It was said that the garden design had won a world-class award. The hospital was established by Professor Romanka, who was particularly picky when it came to garden layouts. Gong Jia was interested, so he walked around the small path, half sightseeing and half taking a stroll. Yu Yu was a little bored, so he sat on the swing and swung his legs. Just as he was bored to death, he caught a glimpse of a snow-white figure from the corner of his eye. Chapter 4071. Even though she was not far away, Yu Yu could not see her features clearly as she was hidden in the shadows. However, he could still tell from the corner of her snow-white shirt that it was Natalia. Wasn't she in the ward? Yu Yu was so shocked that he stood up from the swing. Natalia seemed to have felt his gaze as well. She avoided his gaze and turned to leave. Natalia. Yu Yu had just called out to her. The figure paused for a moment and immediately ran in another direction. Wait. When Yu Yu saw this, he immediately chased after her. Natalia did not run very fast. After all, Yu Yu was taller than her. In a flash, he was about to catch up with her. However, Natalia changed direction and quickly hid in a corner. Yu Yu chased after her again. When he turned the corner, he raised his head and realized that it was the entrance to the ward building. When he turned the corner, he raised his head and saw Natalia's snow-white figure flickering in and out of view. Wait. Yu Yu did not know why she had run when she had seen him. He also did not know why she had appeared in the back garden. Wasn't she in the ward? Could it be that she had snuck out again? Yu Yu chased after her regardless of the consequences. He followed her figure and turned down many corridors. Finally, he saw her at the entrance of a medicine changing room. That was the end of the corridor. She seemed to be lost. She looked around and did not know where to go. Yu Yu stopped in his tracks and called out softly, Natalia? She was obviously frightened. When she turned around and saw that it was him, she did not look too good. Her purple eyes were filled with anger. She was obviously angry. Humph. She snorted. However, this snort was not annoying. It was like the meowing of a kitten. He could not help but feel tender affection for her. Yu Yu guessed that she must have been angry because he had accidentally exposed her whereabouts and had caused her to be captured by Alice. Hence, she couldn't help but feel angry when she saw him. It's you. Natalia was fluent in Chinese. However, Alice had also mentioned that Natalia had met the child in a welfare home through a good friend when Romanka visited China. Natalia had grown up in China, so she was probably of mixed Eurasian descent. Alice said that Natalia was an abandoned child. No one knew who her mother was or who her father was. She was found at the entrance of the maternity hospital in winter, wrapped in swaddling clothes and curled up in a paper box. When she was found, her face was red from the cold and she was dying. She was so cold that her face was red. If it had happened a little later, he might have been frozen to death. Before Professor Romanka met her, Natalia did not have a name. There were so many children in the welfare home and they were all referred to by numbers. Natalia was called 9, because she was the 9th child to be found that year. I'm sorry. Yu Yu apologized sincerely and guiltily. I really didn't mean to betray you just now. Natalia did not buy it. She pouted and glared at him. She did not want to forgive him. Yu Yu looked a little uneasy. He asked tentatively, Are you still angry? Chapter 4072. She didn't seem to like talking. Yu Yu couldn't help but size her up. Alice had said that Natalia had dual identity disorder, but he couldn't see anything wrong with it. Natalia, he tried to test her again by calling her name softly. Natalia looked up. Her eyelashes fluttered slightly. She tilted her head and finally looked at the boy in front of her seriously. She couldn't help but be captivated by his deep and exquisite eyes. "Your eyes are so beautiful." She narrowed her eyes and smiled. There seemed to be a bright light in her eyes. Was she praising him? Yu smiled back. "Is that so? You really didn't do it on purpose?" Natalia still didn't believe him. Yu immediately said, "Yes, it's true." "Then, do me a favor and I won't be angry anymore." Natalia crossed her arms in front of her chest. She was as proud as a kitten. Yu couldn't help but be curious. "What favor?" Natalia's lips curled into a smile. She suddenly reached out and grabbed his hand tightly. "Come." Natalia held Yu's hand and walked through a corridor. Finally, they stopped in front of a room. She shushed him and carefully pushed the door open. The room looked like an office. Yu followed her in. Natalia walked to the cabinet and pointed at the top. "Up there." "Up there?" "There's a box up there. If you can take the box down, I'll be friends with you." Yu couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Did she have such low standards for making friends? "Okay, I'll take it down for you." The cabinet was very tall. It was almost 2 meters tall. Yu moved a chair over and stood on it. He reached for the box and opened it. Inside was a dazzling array of amber candies. Candies? Yu was a little surprised. He thought that there was some treasure hidden in the box. It turned out that it was just candies. "Thank you." Natalia took the candy from him with a satisfied smile in her eyes. She took out a green amber candy from the box. It smelled like green apples and handed it to Yu. "Here." Yu took the candy in surprise and asked curiously, "Why did you leave the candy here?" Natalia pouted, a little angry. "I didn't hide it." "They did." "Them?" "Yes, they don't allow me to eat sweets." "Why?" Yu could not help but worry. She must be talking about Professor Romanka, right? Looking at the decoration of the office, it was obvious that this was Professor Romanka's office. "Why didn't he let you eat candy?" "I don't know." Natalia was clearly unhappy. She hugged the candy box and sat down on the sofa. Smiling, she opened one of the red candy wrappers and showed it to Yu. "My favorite strawberry flavor." Yu hesitated. On one hand, he felt that the child in front of him was as pure as crystal. She was sad because she couldn't eat candy, but she was smiling because of a candy. He couldn't resist such a smile. On the other hand, he couldn't help but worry. He was worried that Professor Romanka didn't allow her to eat sweets. He was worried that Natalia's health wasn't good. Therefore, he went up and took the candy box back. "Don't eat it." The smile on Natalia's face froze. Chapter 4073. Natalia was speechless as she stared at him. Her snow-white face instantly flushed red, and her eyes turned cold. Natalia stood up angrily. Her bright eyes were covered with a thin layer of mist. "Give me back the candy." However, Yu hugged the box tightly. "You can't eat it." "Why?" Natalia blinked, and her eyelashes were wet with tears. "Why did you snatch my candy?" "If Professor Romanka doesn't allow you to eat it, then you must not eat it. So, don't eat it." Yu was being kind. That was because there were indeed some patients who were strict about their intake of sugar when taking medicine. Natalia seemed to have seen through his concerns, but she became even angrier. "You're the same as them." She stood up with a pale face and pushed him away angrily. "You're the same as them." As she spoke, she bit her lip in sadness and ran away. Yu was about to chase after her, but he got up too quickly and accidentally knocked over the trolley. Yu looked on helplessly at her receding figure and sighed. He turned around and squatted down to pick up the stack of documents that had been knocked over on the floor. When he picked them up, Yu glanced at them and realized that they were Natalia's pathology report. At first, He only glanced at them casually, but his gaze froze. Hallucinogen. This word on the pathology report caught his eye. Yu held the pathology report and glanced at it seriously. Only then did he realize that Professor Romanka did not allow Natalia to eat candy. Hallucinogen was a hallucinogen that had been developed. It was usually used for mental treatment. People who took this drug would hallucinate. If one took this drug, they could not touch sugar because this drug contained a high amount of lactose. If they took in additional sugar, it might cause diabetes. Therefore, Professor Romanka strictly controlled Natalia's sugar intake. Hallucinogen was not a common English word. Most people did not know it at all. But he knew. This was because Gong Fan had been taking this medicine while he was recuperating on Jacques Island. If this drug was taken lightly, it would have a certain sleep-inducing effect. However, Yu noticed that the dosage on the pathology report was 5 times more than his. This was already considered high content. If hallucinogen was taken in excess, there was a certain risk of death. Why would Romanka do that? Yu was furious. There you are. Outside the door, Gong Jia heaved a sigh of relief. He pushed the door open and walked in, muttering, "Didn't you say you were going to wait for me on the swing? When I saw you disappear, I was even prepared to commit suicide to atone for my sins." He sounded so pitiful that it sounded a little exaggerated. But in reality, he really imagined Yunshishi's dark side. Yu was the apple of her eye. If he dared to lose his biological nephew, he wouldn't be able to make up for it by just cutting his own throat. Yu raised her eyebrows when she saw Gong Jia. Hallucinogen. Alice was a little surprised. What's going on? In the office, Yu spread Natalia's pathology report in front of Alice. Alice picked it up and looked at it. She was stunned. What's going on? Don't you know? Yu was a little surprised. He thought that Alice would definitely know. Chapter 4074. Hallucinogen is a hallucinogen. I'm sure Professor Romanka knows the real use of this drug. Yu paused. The muscles on her face stiffened. Alice held the pathology report and hesitated for a long time. Then, she suddenly realized something. Maybe I've guessed why Professor Romanka gave her this drug. Perplexed, the boy sought confirmation from his father. Tell me. What's the reason? This drug is toxic. Although the dosage is not critical, it's still higher than the normal dosage used for pathology. You know that this drug is hallucinogenic. Yes. For general medication, for example, when a patient has bipolar disorder, anxiety, or insomnia, taking this medicine, a small dose can have a certain calming effect. However, according to this dosage, the person taking the drug will have hallucinations. Hallucinations, yes. In other words, Yu obviously guessed Professor Romanka's intention. Her expression turned cold. Alice nodded and sighed. I'm guessing that Professor Romanka wants to experiment on Natalia. He wants to create hallucinations to awaken or create Natalia's second personality. By creating hallucinations, he wants Natalia's main personality to believe that she has a twin sister. When the main personality believes in the hallucinations and tampers with her memories, she will naturally split into a second personality. In theory, this is the case, but no one has ever practiced it. Of course, when Professor Romanka wanted to use me to hypnotize Natalia and create a second personality, I didn't agree. It seems that he has resorted to this unorthodox method to achieve his goal. Yu clenched her fists tightly. She must stop taking the drug immediately. I'm guessing that the drug has already stopped. Alice said, this pathology report is from last month. This month, the drug should have stopped. Then, she couldn't help but be curious. How did you get this pathology report? Yu pondered for a moment and decided to keep this a secret for now. I got lost in the hospital and accidentally walked into a room. In the room, I saw this pathology report. Of course, he was curious. Natalia had been brought back to the ward by Alice. Why would she appear in the backyard? Although he was curious, since he had promised Natalia to keep this a secret, he naturally had to keep his promise. I see, Alice nodded and said seriously, Professor Romanka is too much. He shouldn't have done this. Natalia is his daughter. Doesn't he think it's cruel? It's too much to use his own daughter for an experiment. Gong Jia could not help but chuckle at the boy's concern for Natalia. He could not help reminding him, Natalia isn't Professor Romanka's biological daughter. Not every adoptive father would treat their adopted daughter as their own. Professor Romanka might have adopted Natalia with a purpose in mind. Yu Yu's heart ached. He suddenly raised his head and tugged at Gong Jia's sleeve. It seemed like he was negotiating, but his tone was commanding. Uncle, will you adopt Natalia? What? Gong Jia was baffled, his face full of question marks. Why should I adopt her? Chapter 4075. But Natalia has already been adopted by Professor Romanka. Gong Jia reminded him kindly. Yu Yu did not take it seriously and retorted, this is not adoption, this is abuse. Alice agreed seriously, according to international law, Professor Romanka did not violate any adoption laws. His adoptive relationship with Natalia is legal and we have no way of interfering. As for your uncle, he can't adopt Natalia directly because she doesn't meet the requirements for adoption. Yu Yu could not help but feel melancholy when he heard this. When Alice saw this, she could not help but be interested. She squatted in front of him and gently tugged at his little hand. Do you like her? Yu Yu immediately blushed. He avoided her gaze awkwardly and snorted, no. Then, why are you so concerned about her? Alice grinned and wanted to get to the bottom of this. Ha! Gong Jia rubbed his nephew's head dotingly and said, our Yu Yu is experiencing his first awakening of love. Has he fallen for a girl? Yu Yu blushed and emphasized, don't talk nonsense. I just feel that Natalia is very pitiful to be abused like this. He could not help but think of himself. He had been imprisoned in such a world since he was young and had no freedom. But Natalia was different from him. She was a healthy child. It was hard to imagine that she had been abandoned when she was just born. She had survived the harsh winter and had been forced to be locked up in such a hospital and undergo such experiments. She did not have dual personality disorder, but she had been made to have it. She could have been carefree like other children, going out to play or eating delicious sweets. But she could only be locked up in a cold and miserable ward. Even freedom was what she wished for. Professor Romanka is not fit to be her father. As he said this, Yu Yu looked at Gong Jia with an extremely deep gaze. Gong Jia cleared his throat and said, don't tell me, you really want me to adopt her? Yu Yu continued to glare at him. Gong Jia continued, I'm not married yet. Girls like men who are caring and responsible. This brat was clearly trying to drag him into the water. Gong Jia still pretended to be dead, raising his head to look into the distance. Yu Yu continued to stare at him. The uncle and nephew faced each other in silence. Yu Yu's gaze was too sharp. Gong Jia could not hold on any longer and surrendered. I surrender. Please don't glare at me like that. Why don't you let your dear daddy adopt her? That way, you'll have a cute little sister. Yu Yu pursed her lips. But daddy and mommy have already adopted Lisa. It's okay. No matter how many Natalias there are, your daddy can afford them all. That's different. Yu Yu crossed her arms and said seriously, I think you're the most suitable candidate. Gong Jia was silent. This brat was obviously trying to push him into the fire pit, wasn't he? Alice said quietly, you won't lose anything by adopting her. Anyway, you won't be poor. You might as well agree. Gong Jia's face turned pale. I don't know how to take care of a child. How do you expect me to take care of her? When he thought of Natalia's eyes, which were as noble and inviolable as a ragdoll cat, he felt that this little girl was unruly and would not be easy to get along with. Chapter 4076. Alice and Yu Yu both hoped that Gong Jia would adopt Natalia, but Gong Jia was especially stubborn. Give up. There's no way I'll adopt Natalia. However, half an hour later. Gong Jia sat in front of Professor Romanka with an ashen face and slammed the table. I want custody of Natalia. Whether you're willing or not, you have to give it up to me. Professor Romanka stared at him in shock. Alice sized up Gong Jia before turning to look at Professor Romanka. Smiling, she said, young Master Jia feels that he and this child are fated. After a pause, Alice whispered into his ear, Professor, you don't know this, but young Master Jia doesn't like women, so he wants to adopt a child. But don't worry, he'll definitely treat Natalia well and treat her like his own. Professor Romanka couldn't bear to part with her. It wasn't because he had deep feelings for Natalia. It was because he didn't want to give up on Natalia. After all, her condition would be helpful to his research. He was naturally unwilling to give up on her just like that. Professor Romanka shook his head, obviously unwilling. However, Gong Jia didn't mind using force since he wouldn't listen to soft tactics. Don't think that I don't know what research you're using Natalia for. Gong Jia narrowed his eyes and said, I already have evidence of you abusing the adopted child. If this is brought to the International Court of Justice, all your fame and fortune will be gone. Professor Romanka turned pale with fright. What do you mean by that? You're using Natalia for your experiments, aren't you? Gong Jia leaned closer to him and said expressionlessly, hallucinogen. Just this pathology report alone is enough to make you suffer. Professor Romanka had initially suspected that Gong Jia was making an empty comment without any evidence. He didn't expect him to have Natalia's pathology report in his hands. Professor Romanka could no longer sit still. Alice shook her head helplessly. Lowering her voice, she said, Professor Romanka, you know that young Master Jia is from Hurricane Group. You wouldn't want to offend Hurricane Group, right? Professor Romanka forced a smile and was silent for a long time. Finally, he gritted his teeth and nodded. All right. But Natalia's condition is very unstable. If anything happens, send her to my research center immediately. Yu stood to the side. When she heard Professor Romanka's words and saw that there was no trace of reluctance in his eyes, she was even more certain that Natalia was just a sacrifice in Professor Romanka's eyes. An experimental subject. He had no feelings for her at all. He was all the more glad that he had made a wise choice by forcing Gong Jia to adopt Natalia. This man didn't deserve to be Natalia's father. In the ward, Natalia was leaning against the window alone. She looked out of the window in a daze. Her gaze was empty and unfocused. Her chestnut-colored hair fell to the side of her ears. She pouted. She didn't know how long she had been sitting like that until a soft rustling sound came from the door. Puzzled, she looked in the direction of the sound and saw a small hand sneaking in a candy from the corner of the door. Candy? Natalia's gaze froze. She walked over, squatted down at the door, and picked up the candy. It was her favorite strawberry flavor. Chapter 4077. Just as she finished speaking, another piece of candy rolled in through the crack of the door. When Natalia saw it, she couldn't help but feel a little puzzled. She picked it up again. It was a green, apple-flavored candy. Who was it? She couldn't help but wonder who would be so bored as to slip candy through the crack of the door. Who is it? She asked again. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Another 3 pieces of candy rolled in. Natalia picked them up and suddenly realized that they were a different flavor from the candy she had hidden earlier. There were purple and pink ones. She had never eaten this kind of candy before. Thus, she curiously peeled it open and realized that this candy was actually soft candy. She put it in her mouth and took a bite. A rich yogurt flavor suddenly overflowed between her lips and teeth. So sweet. It also had a slightly sour taste. However, this sourness didn't affect the texture at all. Instead, it was sour and sweet. It was even more delicious than the candy she had eaten before. She didn't eat candy much. Before she was 6 years old, she didn't even know that candy existed. Later, when she came to Michelle Hospital, a nurse saw that she was cute and secretly gave her a piece of candy. That was the first time she had tasted something so sweet. She liked it very much. This nurse also really loved her. Every time she saw her, she would give her all the candy she had on her. Sometimes, it was apple-flavored. Sometimes, it was strawberry-flavored. Sometimes, it was grape-flavored. However, this nurse only had 2 kinds of candies on her. They were both hard candies. Sometimes, it was 1 piece. Sometimes, it was several pieces. Later, the nurse gradually became busy. Often, there were many times when she wouldn't see her for a few days. Thus, Natalia would secretly hide these candies in a box. Just like that, from 1 or 2 candies at the beginning, she had stocked up a box full of them. She especially loved candies, but she couldn't bear to eat them. Because at that time, Professor Romanka had started experimenting on her and warned her not to eat sugar. She didn't know what would happen if she ate the candy, so she ate it secretly. Later, Professor Romanka found the candy hidden under her pillow. Following the clues, he found a box full of candy. In a fit of anger, he scolded her harshly and hid the candy in his office. Since then, Natalia was no longer close to Professor Romanka. Natalia didn't like Professor Romanka to begin with. Children are intelligent because they do not understand many things. But often, children like or hate a person. It all depends on whether that person is friendly to the child or not. Although Professor Romanka seemed to love her and was close to her, for some unknown reason, Natalia simply did not like him. If she could choose, she would definitely choose to stay in the orphanage instead of following Professor Romanka. So far, she still called Professor Romanka Professor. In fact, the first reason why Romanka adopted her was because he found her cute. The second reason was that he felt that she had a certain amount of potential. She could split into 2 personalities and would be a good test subject. There were too many factors that could be exploited. Chapter 4078. She had been locked up in the ward for a long time, but she was not willing to be imprisoned like this. After researching for a long time, she finally found a secret door that allowed her to enter and exit the ward freely. Thus, Natalia would often sneak out of prison. She had always wanted to secretly take back the candy box in Professor Romanka's office when he was not paying attention. This was hers, and Professor Romanka had no right to take it away. Actually, she had stopped taking her medicine, so she could eat candy. However, Professor Romanka had forgotten about this, so he did not take it to heart. Natalia was not close to him, so she was not willing to be honest with Professor Romanka about anything. Professor Romanka naturally did not understand why Natalia always escaped from the ward. Delicious. Candy made people happy. There was no doubt about this. Natalia's mood suddenly brightened, as if the sky had cleared after the rain. It tasted really good. However, there seemed to be only one of this flavor of jelly candy. Was there no more? She could not help but feel disappointed. She lay on the ground and looked outside through the crack in the door. She saw a few candies lying alone outside the door, but no one was outside. Who was the person who had given her candies just now? Natalia was curious, so she sneaked to the window. She took out a powerful magnet from her pocket and used it to unlock the window. She flipped out of the window and landed on the ground. When she turned around to look at the door, she was surprised to see that there was a line of candies at the door that stretched all the way to the end of the corridor. She walked over curiously and looked for a while. Then, she squatted down and picked up the candies one by one. She followed the path of the candies and walked to the end of the corridor. However, she found that there were still candies lying quietly on the ground around the corner. Natalia hid in the corner of the wall and looked around. From afar, she could see candies stretching out in a straight line. There was no end in sight. It seemed like a prank, but it did not seem like one. Who was it? Could it be that someone was deliberately playing a trick on her? Natalia frowned. She was a little suspicious, but she still followed the path of the candies and picked them up one by one. When she reached the end of the corridor, Natalia had picked up all the candies. By then, the pockets of her hospital gown were full. She stood up and suddenly saw a figure standing at the end of the corridor. She looked and walked closer curiously. Only then did she realize that Yu Yu was standing there quietly with a box of candies in his hands. This box of candies was the one that had been confiscated. He smiled at her and waved at her. "Come here." Natalia walked closer, and Yu Yu handed the box of candies to her. "Here." Seeing him reminded her of the day when he didn't let her eat candy. Natalia was still a little upset. "Why is it you again?" Pausing for a moment, she thought about it and asked suspiciously, "Did you leave all these candies at the door?" "Yes." "Is it good?" Natalia almost nodded her head in disappointment. She held it in and snorted coldly. Her face was full of arrogance, but she was unwilling to talk to him. "Are you still angry?" asked the boy helplessly. Natalia glared at him, clearly regarding him as a bad guy. Chapter 4079. Yu Yu immediately begged for mercy. "I was wrong. I thought you were sick and couldn't eat sweets." Natalia immediately retorted, "I'm not sick." "I'm not sick." "Well, now I know that you're not sick. You can eat sweets." Yu Yu clasped his hands together and looked like he was wronged. He blinked at her carefully and said, "Don't be angry, okay?" Perhaps it was his playful gaze that finally dispelled Natalia's anger. She took a deep breath and raised her eyebrows. "Okay," she said, pretending to be generous. "Forget it. You didn't mean it." As she spoke, she stared at the candy box in Yu Yu's hand. She couldn't bring herself to take it, so she hinted at him with her eyes to hand it over. Yu Yu could not help feeling helpless when he saw her staring fixedly at the candy box. Wasn't this girl too gullible? If she was a stranger, wouldn't she be able to get him to leave with a few sweets? Yu Yu deliberately lifted the candy box. Natalia's purple eyes followed the movement of the candy box. Yu Yu could even imagine her saliva flowing out of her mouth. "Do you want some?" he asked. Natalia immediately became alert. She pretended to be calm and tried not to care, but her throat moved. It was obvious that she was craving the candy. "That's my candy." She emphasized this sentence. Yu Yu said seriously, "Although the candy box looks like yours, it's not yours. Also, the candy inside is mine." "You're lying." "I'm not lying. If you don't believe me, you can see for yourself." Yu Yu opened the candy box. Natalia took a look and realized that the candy inside was really not hers. Moreover, these were the soft candies that she had tasted earlier. They tasted better than the ones she had hidden. Natalia's eyes were glued to the candy box. She was craving it. In fact, the so-called candy box was just an ordinary box that could be seen in hospitals. It was a metal box used to store surgical instruments. She secretly took one and used it to hide sweets. She gulped and swallowed her saliva. In fact, she really wanted it, but she pretended to be reserved and just stared at it. Yu Yu was almost amused by her unblinking expression, but he held it in and asked her, "Do you want some?" Natalia nodded, then blushed and quickly shook her head. "I don't want to eat, this candy is my favorite," Yu Yu said as she peeled a piece of candy and popped it into her mouth. "Delicious." As he chewed, the aroma of blueberries wafted through the air and into Natalia's nose. She took a sniff, and that fresh and fruity aroma made her saliva even more wantonly. It was like a provocation. Because it was a soft candy, the sound of it being chewed made people salivate. After Yu Yu finished eating, he smacked his lips and licked them. "It smells so good." Natalia felt that she was about to drool when she opened her mouth. She gulped but did not say anything. She just stared at him quietly. When Yu Yu saw this, he laughed in his heart. Hence, he peeled a strawberry-flavored soft candy and walked over to her. He held the soft candy between his fingers and looked at her with a smile. Chapter 4080. Just by looking at it, Natalia could imagine the sweetness of the jelly candy when it was squeezed between her teeth. The sweet juices flowed freely between her lips and teeth. Yu squeezed the soft candy and smiled deeply. Do you want to eat it? Natalia did not say anything, but she did not look away either. She just stared at the candy in his hand. Apart from her desire, she did not have the ability to think. However, she did not give in. She still looked proud and aloof. She had no intention of bending over for the soft candy. You don't want to eat it? What a pity. This candy tastes better than your candy. Natalia thought to herself, of course it tastes good. Just the smell of it is enough to make me want to eat it. But she could not give in. Natalia tried her best to retract her gaze, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop staring at him. That candy was simply too tempting. She could not help it. She could not help it, no, she could not give in. She had to be reserved. As she thought about it, she did not move, but she could not look away either. She could only let her saliva run wild. Yu looked at her expression and sighed in his heart. Wasn't this girl a little too cute? She stared at the candy without blinking. She was obviously trying to act nonchalant, but her unblinking gaze betrayed her. He had already seen her swallow a few times, but she was still holding it in. She was saying no, but her body was telling the truth. He could not bear it. Forget it. He would not tease her anymore. Otherwise, he would look very unkind. Hence, he brought the candy to her mouth. Eat it. I'll feed you. Hurry up and eat it. Otherwise, she would be drooling. Natalia swallowed hard. Just as she was about to open her mouth and suck on the candy, Yu suddenly said, after eating this candy, we will be friends, okay? When Natalia heard this, she stopped herself. She shut her mouth and glanced at him in disdain. She finally looked at him, but it was from the corner of her eye. It was obvious that she despised him. Her gaze seemed to say, are you trying to bribe me with a candy? Naive. Yu laughed. Why? Are you not willing to be my friend? Natalia shook her head. Yu tilted her head and rubbed her chin. You don't like me? Natalia's face was still cold. It seems that one piece of candy is not enough. Yu picked up the candy box again. If you become my friend, then this box of candy will be yours. Natalia was finally shaken. It wasn't that he wasn't tempted. Looking at the box full of candies, her eyes were filled with yearning. Yu brought the candy to her mouth again. His voice was bewitching as he tried to seduce her. Be good, eat it. Natalia couldn't take it anymore. She opened her little mouth and carefully bit the candy. The sugar wasn't very big. With this action, her lips touched his fingertips slightly. Yu couldn't help but blush. He felt as if his fingertips had been scorched by her touch. It was burning. Natalia was completely unaware. She sucked on the candy and was finally satisfied. This was the first time she had eaten a soft candy, and it was also the first time she had eaten such a delicious candy. It was so sweet. Chapter 4081. Natalia tasted the sweetness in her mouth and her mood improved. When she looked at Yu again, she finally found him pleasing to the eye. She did not look at him out of the corner of her eye. Instead, she glanced at him. Eventually, her gaze fell on the candy box in Yu's arms. She looked at it again and again. Half testing, half hinting, she asked, is the purple one blueberry? In other words, she was eagerly waiting for Yu to let her have a taste of the purple candy. Yu could not help but want to laugh. This girl looked cold and aloof, but she was actually a little foodie. In front of the candy, she was not reserved at all. Yu asked tentatively, then, will you be my friend? Unless, Natalia's gaze was firmly fixed on the candy box in Yu's arms. If you give me the whole box of candy, I will be your friend. Yu was a little doubtful that if he gave her the candy box just like that, she would fall out with him. However, Yu still passed the candy box to her. Here, you can have it. Natalia was so shocked that her eyes widened. She had not expected that Yu would be willing to give her so much candy. Did he not eat it? Or, was there poison in the candy? Perhaps it was because the candy was very precious to Natalia. When she saw that Yu Yu had casually given her the candy, she could not help but doubt the authenticity of the situation. Yu Yu saw that she was doubting him and held back his laughter. He pursed his lips and said, "These are all yours. Don't worry, I won't take them back." "You won't go back on your word?" "Yes, of course." Natalia's face finally broke into a bright smile. She narrowed her eyes and smiled at Yu Yu. Then, she peeled another candy and popped it into her mouth. In the distance, Alice and Gong Jia watched and rubbed their chins. "Are you planning to put Natalia in hurricane?" Gong Jia frowned and pondered for a moment. Yu Yu said that she doesn't want Natalia to grow up in hurricane. "Why?" "Because he's worried about you." Alice fell silent. What did he mean by he couldn't be at ease with her around? Am I a tiger? He's afraid that you'll use Natalia as a test subject. Alice fell silent again. Fine. It seemed like her image as a witch had been deeply ingrained in Yu Yu's heart. Then where do you plan to settle her? Gong Jia was also considering this problem. He racked his brains and suddenly thought of a good candidate. Ding dong ding dong. In the apartment, on the big bed in the bedroom, Hua Jin was still deep in sleep. Amidst the constant ringing of the doorbell, he finally woke up. Who? He grumbled in annoyance and lay on the bed reluctantly for a while. The doorbell continued to ring, and it seemed to be ringing more and more frequently. He finally got up from the bed and shuffled to the door in his slippers. He thought that the new assistant had made a mistake about the schedule again. He opened the door and said unhappily, "It's my day off today." The moment he opened the door, Hua Jin saw the tall figure standing at the door and woke up instantly. The sleepy bug also disappeared without a trace in an instant. Gong, before he could finish his sentence, he caught a glimpse of Yu Yu standing next to Gong Jia and a strange but cute little girl. He couldn't be more awake. What's going on? Move away. Chapter 4082. Get out of my way. Gong Jia pushed him aside and walked into the apartment like the man of the house. Hey! Before Hua Jin could stop him, Gong Jia had already walked into the bedroom. Hua Jin was even more dumbfounded. What was this? Was he trespassing? Yu Yu held Natalia's hand and walked in. She looked around and asked in confusion, "Uncle Hua Jin, are you still not up?" Hua Jin rubbed his forehead helplessly and nodded weakly. "It's my day off today, so I'm catching up on sleep." Catching up on sleep? Yeah. Hua Jin said, "I'm resting for 3 days." Why? Is there something wrong? He lowered his head and saw the cute little girl beside Yu Yu looking up at him. He couldn't help but think that this little girl was really beautiful. What was even more surprising was that this girl had purple eyes. He was shocked and squatted down to look at the girl's eyes. Natalia saw that Hua Jin kept staring at her. At first, she was not used to it and hid behind Yu Yu. She was obviously a little timid. Hua Jin smiled at her. "It's okay. Uncle isn't a bad person." For some reason, it seemed that Hua Jin's smile was naturally harmless and harmless. Natalia also realized that this handsome and beautiful man in front of her would definitely not harm her. Hence, she finally gathered her courage and stuck her head out. She blinked her beautiful purple eyes and looked at Hua Jin curiously. Hua Jin was a little surprised by her purple eyes. He thought to himself that such a young child wouldn't wear contact lenses. Moreover, her eyes didn't look like they belonged to someone who wore contact lenses. He was a little surprised. He had never seen someone who was born with purple eyes. Hence, he couldn't help but take a few more looks. Maybe she was born with different eyes. Hua Jin could also tell from Natalia's exquisite features that she was of mixed Eurasian descent. It was probably because she was of mixed blood that the color of her pupils was different from that of an ordinary Asian girl. Her name is Natalia. Natalia, what a nice name. Just as he was about to speak, Gong Jia's footsteps came from behind him and stopped beside him. Your house is so small. When Hua Jin heard this, he stood up unhappily and muttered, "Don't you know how high the housing prices in the capital are? Such an apartment of more than 100 square meters, located in the downtown business district, was worth tens of millions." This man actually thought that this place was too small. Gong Jia sized him up casually before saying out of the blue, "Put on your clothes." This time, Hua Jin was confused. Huh? More than an hour later, when Hua Jin realized that he was already at the sales office of a villa district, he looked at Yu Yu and Natalia, who were sitting on his left, and then looked at Gong Jia, who was looking at the floor plan. The sales representative asked cautiously, "May I know if you are paying in full or taking a loan?" Gong Jia replied, "Full payment." Hua Jin's mouth opened even wider. Huh? Could he do whatever he wanted just because he was rich? Full payment? This villa was worth more than 100 million because it came with its own furnishings. How could he say, "full payment," so casually? Was this guy trying to sell him off? While Hua Jin was still in a daze, when it was time to sign the contract, the sales representative's eyes lit up. Chapter 4083. May I ask, whose name is this house under? The Gong Jia turned around and asked Hua Jin, "What's your name?" Hua Jin, real name. Rong Jin, write it yourself. Oh, Hua Jin had just picked up the pen and signed his name on the contract under the guidance of the salesperson. He was even more confused now. He took a closer look and realized that he had signed the contract under the ownership of the villa. Huh? He was even more confused now. He couldn't understand what was going on. Yu Yu saw Hua Jin's confused face and couldn't bear to see it anymore. Hence, when the Gong Jia went to swipe the card, she said to the confused Hua Jin, "Uncle Hua Jin, Natalia is my uncle's adopted daughter. But as you know, his job is a little dangerous and he can't take her with him all the time. After thinking about it, you are the best candidate." Best candidate? Hua Jin looked at Natalia and the corners of his lips twitched. "I'm a surrogate adoptive father?" "Yes." Yu Yu hugged his arm and said coquettishly, "Uncle Hua Jin, please take care of my Natalia." Wait. Hua Jin only felt that his mind was in a mess. He waved his hand and took a deep breath. He finally regained some of his composure. He took a deep breath, opened his eyes and forced himself to calm down. "You mean, this child called Natalia was adopted by Gong Jia and he didn't have time to take care of her, so he asked me to take care of her?" Yu Yu nodded. "Yes. Hua Jin frowned and sighed helplessly. "I don't have any experience in taking care of children. She's not breastfeeding. She doesn't need you to feed her or coax her. Anyway, just take care of her like you would take care of me." When Hua Jin heard this, his brain still went blank. He still hadn't gotten used to the fact that he was about to step into the ranks of newbie stay-at-home dad. His empty eyes fell on Gong Jia. He swallowed and said tentatively, "But, I usually have a lot of free time. I have to shoot a movie or something." Gong Jia suddenly fumbled in his arms and asked, "How much do you earn in a year?" Hua Jin pondered for a moment. This income is not always certain. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. 100 million? I can't get that much. Gong Jia raised his eyebrows. Without saying a word, he took out a stack of checkbooks and wrote something on it with a pen. Hua Jin leaned over to take a look. At that moment, Gong Jia had already signed his name and handed it to him. HSBC. You can withdraw the money directly. Gong Jia handed him a check. It was an empty check. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. Yu Yu explained, "You can withdraw as much as you want." Hua Jin swallowed again. This house was registered under his name, and there was even a check like this. "I don't deserve this reward." Who said that I don't deserve this reward? Yu Yu glanced at Natalia and said to Hua Jin, "As long as you take good care of her, it'll be fine. As for work, as long as you're free, take on a few movies. If you're not free, take care of Natalia first. You don't have to worry about anything else. Uncle will pay the alimony." Wouldn't the alimony be too much? He didn't dare to take it. Chapter 4084. Keep it well. Gong Jia snorted. Hua Jin shivered in fear and put the check in his pocket. After collecting the receipt and contract for the house purchase, Hua Jin got into Gong Jia's car, only to see the latter instructing the chauffeur to drive them toward the furniture mall. Mei Kai Long Furniture Mall. Yu brought Natalia to sit in the dessert section. Gong Jia led Hua Jin to the furniture section. Basically, he would pay for the furniture he chose. Hua Jin was speechless. As a celebrity, Hua Jin's income had always been very high. However, it was definitely not so high that he could easily spend 6 or 7 figures just to buy a piece of furniture. A set of kitchen cabinets cost 800,000, a sofa cost 200,000, and a coffee table cost 500,000. When he heard the prices, he was stunned. Wasn't this a little too scary? Originally, he thought that no matter how rich Gong Jia was, he would only be on par with Mu Yaja. Now, it seemed like that was not the case. Buying a villa was like buying a set of toys. As for the furniture, it was like playing house. It was as if the series of zeros on the price tags were just a series of numbers to him. When night came, the furniture was brought in and the electrical appliances were sent to the new home. Hua Jin stood in front of the villa again. It felt like a lifetime had passed. Just what had happened on this day? He still could not react. It was like a dream. Yu held Natalia's hand and walked into the villa. He announced happily, "Natalia, from now on, this is your new home." Natalia stood at the door in a daze. It took her quite a while to come back to her senses. "Will I be living here from now on?" Natalia's face was a little rosy. She suddenly ran to the sofa and sat down. The sofa was made of American leather and was very comfortable. Sitting on it, she felt like she was being wrapped up. She relaxed her furrowed brows and flashed a smile at Yu. "I like this sofa." Yu walked over and opened his palm. "Let's go. I'll show you your room." Natalia held Yu's hand and walked to her princess room. The entire villa was decorated in American style. The princess room had a romantic atmosphere like a fairy tale. The white wooden four-poster bed, the white bedside, the pink curtains, the light pink theme of the walls, and the beautiful lights. It was a warmth that she had never felt before. "Do you like it?" Natalia pursed her lips and nodded. "Yes. I like it. You'll be staying in this room from now on." "Then, what about you?" "Me? This isn't my home. It's yours." Disappointment flashed across Natalia's eyes. "You don't live here?" Then who's going to live with me?" She suddenly felt uneasy. "Am I going to live alone?" "Of course not." 5 minutes later. Hua Jin squatted in front of Natalia. Yu stood beside her and reminded her softly, "From now on, he's your guardian. You can call him brother." "Wait," Hua Jin interrupted Yu. "How did she call you uncle?" "Daddy." Chapter 4085. Daddy. Hua Jin looked awkwardly at Gong Jia and then at Yu. He complained bitterly, "Then wouldn't there be a difference in seniority?" When Yu heard this, she felt that it made sense. She pondered for a while, but before she could say anything, Natalia suddenly said, "Then I'll call you Mommy." "Mommy." Hua Jin almost vomited blood. He clutched his chest in disbelief. How did this guy come up with such a nickname? When Yu heard this, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She covered her mouth and laughed out loud. "Ha ha ha. Mommy." Gong Jia's face was ashen. He should be angry, but he also felt helpless. More than anything, he was questioning Natalia's logic. Hua Jin immediately explained in all seriousness, "You can't call me Mommy. I'm not a woman." Natalia tilted her head, then threw out a sentence that almost made Hua Jin kneel on the ground. "You're not a woman? I thought you and Daddy were a couple." The painful blow was like an avalanche, covering Hua Jin's face. Hua Jin was so angry that his eyes were about to burst. What? You thought? This child actually thought that he was a woman? Hua Jin touched his face, feeling wronged. He admitted that he was a little more handsome, but a child shouldn't think that he was a woman, right? What was worse was that Natalia thought that he was a couple with Gong Jie. Hua Jin was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. He had the urge to run out of the door. Natalia saw that Hua Jin's face was ashen. She was so scared that she hid behind Yu and muttered softly, "Did I say something wrong?" Yu held back her urge to laugh out loud. She waved her hand and quickly said, "No. No." However, the one standing in front of you is a man, not a woman. Hua Jin muttered unhappily, "The first thing I said when we met was that I was your uncle." Uncle? Uncle sounds good. Yu snapped her fingers and said to Natalia, "Why don't you call him uncle?" When Hua Jin heard this, he also felt that it was not bad. "And then call me uncle." Gong Jie nodded in agreement. He then said to Natalia, "From now on, you will call him Uncle Hua Jin, okay?" When Hua Jin heard this, he felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't because of any other reason, but because he realized that when he spoke to Natalia, Gong Jie was unexpectedly gentle. Her voice was soft and gentle, as if she could drown someone. Luckily, he was facing Natalia. If it had been any other woman, his heart would have stopped beating. Even he couldn't help but feel his heart go numb for a moment when he heard this gentle voice. When Natalia heard this, she nodded. Suddenly, she thought of something and suddenly let go of Yu's arm. She ran to Gong Jie's side and grabbed the corner of his shirt reluctantly. She looked confused and asked, then, "Daddy, where are you going?" Gong Jie furrowed his brows. Even though he had gotten used to having a little girl, who was not related to him by blood, calling him daddy over the past few days, it seemed that he had yet to fully accept the fact that he was a first-time father. After all, he had suddenly changed from a single man to a single daddy. Chapter 4086. However, his feelings for Natalia had improved a lot over the past few days. It was a little strange. Natalia was especially close to him. In order to get close to Natalia, Yu had tricked her with candy and coaxed her nicely. However, when it came to Gong Jie, Natalia liked him so much that she would stick to him whenever he stood there. Yu was also curious as to why Natalia liked Gong Jie so much. He had asked her about it before. The little girl said confidently, "Because daddy is tall and handsome, and he even gives me candy." Yu was not convinced and retorted, "When I grow up, I will definitely be tall and handsome too. Also, I will give you candy too. But you are not my daddy." Natalia's words made Yu speechless. He pursed his lips and finally had nothing to say. All right. This was the charm of a mature man. "Daddy, don't you live here?" Natalia hugged Gong Jie's thigh, reluctant to part with him. Gong Jie bent down and easily carried her in his arms. He reached out and pinched the tip of her nose. Raising his eyebrows, he asked, "Why? You can't bear for daddy to leave?" Natalia shook her head like a rattledrum. "Don't go. I want to be with daddy." Gong Jie frowned slightly. His lips curled into a helpless smile. "I can stay here with you for a few days. However, daddy has to go out to work after a while. When he is done, daddy will come back. It won't be long." "Really?" Gong Jie carried her to Hua Jin's side and coaxed her gently, "In the future, you will be with this uncle, You have to be obedient. It's okay if you don't. Daddy will video call you every day. If this uncle mistreats you, you can complain to daddy and daddy will beat him up." With just a few words, Natalia was so coaxed that she revealed her pearly white teeth. When Hua Jin heard this, he felt that it was unfair. What was this? Why would he mistreat a child for no reason? Moreover, he liked Natalia. Since Gong Jie had entrusted this child to him, he was not happy to see it happen. However, he could only accept it. However, there was one thing that he still had to confirm. Are you sure that you will compensate me for my absenteeism? Gong Jia glanced at him. I'm sure. Yu Yu replied, Uncle even put his house under your name. This shows his sincerity. Hua Jin calmed himself down. Suddenly, a bad word popped up in his mind. Does this count as being a sugar baby? B. Alimony, property. At that moment, Hua Jin felt like a good wife and mother who took care of the household chores and children. Was it too late for him to back out now? For some reason, a scene appeared in Hua Jin's mind. He was standing in front of the stove with Natalia on his back. He was wearing an apron and a scarf, and he was cooking porridge bitterly. OMG. He did not want to become like this. If this went on, he would definitely become a sallow man. Well, Hua Jin looked at Yu Yu hesitantly. Yu Yu saw through him immediately. Why? Are you going back on your word? Hua Jin replied vaguely, I'm not mentally prepared yet, am I? What mental preparation do you need? Chapter 4087. Gong Jia had been playing with Natalia. When he heard this, he turned around and said coldly, I will hire a nanny, bodyguard, and gardening for you. You just have to play with her and take care of her. Don't let her feel lonely. That's good enough. In other words, these tasks were Hua Jin's job. Accompany her to eat, drink, and play. Hua Jin was a little surprised. He didn't know what kind of special existence this child was for Gong Jia to treat her so seriously. Could it be? Hua Jin looked at Yu Yu meaningfully. When he looked at Natalia, his gaze was unusually gentle. Hua Jin couldn't help but shiver. Could it be, this was Yu Yu's future daughter-in-law? All right. Could it be that his main job was to raise Yu Yu's daughter-in-law? At this thought, Hua Jin couldn't help but want to laugh. He held Yu Yu's little hand and asked curiously, do you like her? Yu Yu didn't react at first and just nodded. Yes. Of course. He liked Natalia a lot. When Hua Jin heard this, he gave him a meaningful look. Is it that kind of like? When Yu Yu realized what Hua Jin's look meant, he immediately came to his senses and said, it's not that kind of like. Then what kind of like is it? Hua Jin lowered his voice and said, I thought your uncle was raising your future daughter-in-law for you. When he said this, Yu Yu couldn't help but blush even more. That's not it. Don't talk nonsense, okay? After a pause, Yu Yu explained, it's probably the kind of like you have for a younger sister. Liar. When I saw you looking at Yueyao, that wasn't the way you looked at her. Although he doted on her a little, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at Natalia was definitely not just limited to sibling love. However, Hua Jin was just teasing him. How old was Yu Yu? How could such a young child understand the love and affection of the adult world? It was probably because he liked her, so he wanted to treat her well purely because he liked her. Hua Jin deliberately teased him, don't worry, I'll definitely help you raise your wife well. Bah. Yu Yu started to threaten him. If you continue to spout nonsense, I'll get uncle to cripple you. Don't. Hua Jin clasped his hands together and begged for mercy. I was wrong, I know I was wrong. Hey, don't tell on me. Yu Yu pulled Hua Jin to the side and whispered, actually, my feelings for Natalia are pure. When I look at her, I feel like I'm looking at myself. Why? Because, Yu Yu said in a low voice, actually, before this, she was adopted by a professor who specialized in the field of psychology and psychology. She was an orphan, but after the adoption, the professor used her as a test subject. Test subject? Hua Jin's expression turned solemn the moment he heard this term. It was inhumane. His mind immediately thought of examples such as human experiments and so on. How could it be so overboard? She was actually a normal child, but the professor wanted to study multiple personality disorder, so he cultivated a second personality in her. Hua Jin was smart and quickly understood what Yu Yu meant by cultivating a second personality. Chapter 4088. Yu Yu's expression was solemn. To be precise, it's not a preparation. It's already created. Hua Jin was dumbfounded. Is it possible to create such a personality? He had always thought that dual personality was either influenced by the environment or born with it. He had never heard that it could be cultivated by humans. How could someone use such a young child to do such a messy experiment? In the past, he admired scientists because they had contributed a lot to mankind. But now, Hua Jin felt a chill run down his spine when he heard about it. It was too terrifying. Dual personality is an extremely painful thing. How could he do that? It's probably because the adopted child has no blood relatives. So, he doesn't know how to cherish her and is not fit to be Natalia's father. So, Hua Jin looked at Gong Jia and suddenly changed his view of Gong Jia. He got Natalia's custody? Yes. Uncle has already gotten Natalia's custody. But you know that with his work, Natalia can't be by his side all the time. Otherwise, it would be very dangerous. So, when necessary, he needs someone to take care of her. You're a good candidate. Why? Hua Jin pointed at himself and was a little surprised. Why me? I'm also very busy with work. Because Uncle Hua Jin is very gentle. Yu smiled. You're so gentle to me. You'll be gentle to Natalia too. I believe you'll be good to Natalia. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel warm inside when he heard that. He didn't expect Yu to have such an image of him. Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Yu raised her hand and stuck out her little finger. Okay, that's a promise. Okay. Hua Jin walked in front of Natalia and squatted down so that he was at eye level with her. Natalia, can you call me Daddy in the future? Daddy? Natalia blinked her beautiful eyes. She looked at him and then at Gong Jia. Her long eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings. Hua Jin's heart melted just looking at her. He couldn't help but think that it would be great if this little girl in front of him was really his biological daughter. But then again, if it was his daughter who looked like him, she would definitely be very beautiful. Daddy? Yes. Hua Jin squeezed her little hand. Don't call me uncle. How about calling me Daddy? Natalia laughed. I have two dads. When Hua Jin heard this, he was also stunned. How could he have forgotten that Natalia already had Gong Jia as her daddy? Can I call you Mommy? Natalia said out of the blue. Hua Jin was instantly stunned. He asked hesitantly, why? Because, Natalia's next sentence left Hua Jin at a loss as to whether he should laugh or cry. Because, you're prettier than a flower. Also, you don't look like a man. Ha ha ha. When Yu heard this, she couldn't help but burst into laughter. Chapter 4089. Hua Jin's face darkened completely. His fans acknowledged that he was prettier than flowers, so they gave him the nickname, Hua Hua, which meant that he was prettier than flowers. But, what did they mean by he didn't look like a man? Even a child was bullying him. Stop laughing. Hua Jin shouted angrily. Seeing that Yu was still laughing, he pushed his head lightly and said, I'm talking to you, don't laugh. I have to explain it properly so that you won't develop a gender identity disorder at such a young age. When Yu heard this, he stopped laughing and started to criticize Hua Jin seriously. Uncle Hua Jin, I feel that you were born with a gender identity disorder, so you can't blame her for this. You see, at least she knows that Uncle and I are men, but she mistook us for men. You really can't blame anyone else for this. When Hua Jin heard this, he raised both hands in surrender. He had already experienced Yu's sharp tongue. However, he still had to explain the matter seriously. Hua Jin turned around and said to Natalia seriously, I'm a man, not a woman. You can call me daddy, uncle, or brother, but you can't call me mommy, auntie, or sister. Do you understand? Looks like a man who has been hurt before, Yu added. Indeed, like auntie, sister, and the like, when Hua Jin wasn't famous yet, he would often hear these strange nicknames when he walked on the streets. Even when he became famous, he was still troubled by this. Many anti-fans and straight guys were jealous of him. He was obviously a man, but he looked like a woman. The anti-fans said that there were 2 female leads in his movies. Besides the real female lead, there was another female lead, which was the character that Hua Jin was playing. When Hua Jin first saw these comments, he was furious. He didn't understand where so many anti-fans came from, and he didn't know how many ghostwriters were involved. But later on, he gradually became numb to it. Later on, he seemed to have trained himself to be like an iron wall, and his heart wasn't as fragile as before. However, Hua Jin shook you. You can't say that I'm like a woman. Otherwise, I will definitely be very sad. Very sad. Very sad. Yu was shaken until he was dizzy. He immediately hugged Hua Jin's shoulders and said softly, Okay, I know. I know. I won't joke with you anymore. Don't shake me anymore. Otherwise, I'll be broken. Gong Jia saw his nephew being shaken by Hua Jin like a puppet, but he turned a blind eye to it. Instead, he pulled Natalia in front of him and said gently, Daddy has work to do. You should follow this uncle and be good, okay? If he bullies you or mistreats you, tell Daddy. In the past few days, Gong Jia and Natalia's relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. In fact, Gong Jia hadn't wanted to adopt Natalia at all. To him, having another child was nothing more than having another burden. Moreover, she wasn't his biological child. He already had Yueyao, this little princess. Hence, no matter how beautiful and cute Natalia was, he was indifferent. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jia finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. Chapter 4090. He already had Yueyao, his little princess. Therefore, no matter how pretty and cute Natalia was, he would not be moved. However, for some reason, after the adoption process was completed, Gong Jia finally met Natalia formally under Alice's arrangement. To everyone's surprise, Natalia was especially close to the man the moment she saw him. Firstly, it was because Gong Jia was tall and handsome. Secondly, the man inexplicably gave her a warm sense of security and belonging. For an orphan like Natalia, what she lacked the most was a sense of security and belonging. This was because she did not have the concept of home since she was young. Moreover, from the orphanage to the Michelle Hospital, Natalia had never felt a sense of belonging. She did not know what a home was, but Gong Jia gave her this kind of warmth. She wanted to rely on this man. At that time, Yu and Alice were also there. When they saw Natalia taking the initiative to throw herself into Gong Jia's arms, they were extremely surprised. They had never thought that Natalia would be so close to anyone. Gong Jia was also very surprised. He had only seen Natalia once. Moreover, at that time in the office, Natalia's attention was all on Yu. Obviously, she did not notice him. To be precise, this was probably the first time they had met. He was also very surprised that Natalia, who was as cold as a cat in front of Yu, would take the initiative to throw herself into his arms. Could it be that this was predestined fate? However, Natalia's throwing herself into his arms did not make him feel repulsed at all. In fact, he enjoyed this kind of closeness. Gong Jia liked girls very much. He did not even think about getting married. However, he had thought about what his future daughter would look like. If she looked like him, then she would definitely look like Yunshishir. She would have a pair of beautiful and charming peach blossom eyes. Her pupils were sparkling, as if there was a vast galaxy hidden in them. She would have a small but perky nose, and pink lips that were like cherry blossoms. Her skin was white and clean, without a trace of impurities. Everything was as beautiful as a crystal. He had never imagined what his future other half would be like, but he had already thought of what his daughter would look like. She must be as beautiful as Yueyao. However, he did not expect that he would adopt a daughter like Natalia. When she returned to the country, Natalia was afraid of strangers, but she was not afraid of him. She wasn't close to Yu or Alice, but she liked to cling to him. Especially at night, Natalia liked to hug him to sleep. At first, Gong Jie didn't know what to do. He didn't know why, but at first, he felt that it was a little awkward for such a small girl to sleep so close to him. However, one day was fine, 2 days passed, and on the third day, he seemed to have gotten used to the identity of father. What was there to be awkward about? Natalia was his daughter. Even though they were not related by blood, they still treated each other as their own. In fact, for Gong Jie, a sense of belonging and security was an extremely luxurious feeling. Even though he was born into a big family like the Gong family, it did not give him much sense of security. He had received military education from his father since he was young, and what was instilled in him was a cold concept. The warmth of a family was still in the memories of his mother and sister. Chapter 4091. This was also the reason why he was so reliant on Yunshushi. No one could replace the warmth that Yunshushi gave him. For some reason, Natalia felt close to him. In the beginning, she thought that such a man with such dazzling looks, handsome, tall, and strong arms would be able to carry her in his arms. Later, the usually cold Gong Jie showed her a rare smile. Natalia was so disappointed that she was mesmerized by this smile. He was too handsome. She fantasized about how good it would be if this man was her father, her family. However, her dream came true. Alice told her that the man in front of her was her daddy and her future family. Natalia liked him more and more. Most likely, the two of them were destined to have such a bond in their fates. Even Hua Jin was surprised that Gong Jie would be so patient with a child. When Natalia heard that Gong Jie was going to leave, she immediately felt reluctant. Frowning, she hugged his arm and said softly, "Don't go." Gong Jie could not help but be moved by her words. It was as if there were roots under his feet, trapping him. He really couldn't bear to leave. The girl in his arms was like cotton candy. Such a pitiful expression, grievance, and longing melted his heart. He actually had an inexplicable feeling for this child. Could this be the legendary fatherly love? Gong Jie had always thought that he was the kind of man who was born with a lack of fatherly feelings. For a man like him, it was hard to imagine what kind of husband and father he would be if he started a family in the future. He didn't expect, he actually had self-awareness as a father. Hua Jin also said, Why don't you stay for a few days and keep her company? I'm not close to her. If you leave, I'll really be at my wit's end. Yu also said, Uncle, why don't you stay for a few more days? There's no hurry to deal with hurricane. Gong Jie also nodded and agreed. All right. He squeezed Natalia's soft hand and comforted her. Then. Daddy will stay for a few days, okay? Natalia's smile widened. Okay. On the first day that Gong Jie stayed, Hua Jin realized a problem. It was true that he was rich. Sure. He could do whatever he wanted. Originally, he thought that even if the villa had been renovated and the furniture and appliances had been moved in, there would be no special smell after special treatment. However, it did not mean that there was no smell at all. Even though it had been ventilated for an entire afternoon, there was still a slight smell of paint. At night, although there was no obvious smell, Hua Jin still advocated not to move in for the time being. However, Gong Jie refused to comply. He complained that Hua Jin's place was as big as a fish tank. How could anyone live there? It was too cramped. Hua Jin was so angry that he almost vomited blood. Fish tank? It was a house of more than 100 square meters. How could it be a fish tank? It was too hurtful. As for Gong Jie, he immediately called the housekeeper and the cleaner. In a short while, the last bit of smell in the house dissipated. Yu also said that no matter how ventilated a new house was, if no one lived there, it would not have the smell of home. Chapter 4092. Hence, Hua Jin had no choice but to call for a moving company. Within a few hours, all the belongings in the apartment had been moved into the villa. That night, they moved into the villa. Hua Jin felt like he was in a dream. No one would have thought that he would move into the villa that he bought on the same day. This was too fast. Too fast. Too fast. At night, the salesperson came to prepare the final procedures for the handover of the villa. She had wanted to see if the owner of the villa had noticed any problems with the quality. In the end, she realized that the owner had already moved in. Was this a hotel? Did he move in with his luggage? The salesperson was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still shocked. She had never seen such a generous buyer. Although there were many rich big bosses in Beijing, no matter how generous they were, buying a house would require a few days of planning. It was not a one-time deal. In the end, this customer was good. A few 100 million yuan was easily spent. The house was handed over before noon, and when she came to take a look at it at night, the furniture and appliances were all ready. Did he have to be so scary? Moreover, the owner was so young and so handsome, hence, the salesperson tried to find out from Yu who Gong Jia was to him. In the end, Yu said casually, "Gong Jia is my uncle. Auntie, he already has a girlfriend." Just as she was wondering who this handsome and rich man's girlfriend was, she watched as Hua Jin walked out in a bathrobe. She was even more dumbfounded. Originally, when she was at the sales office, she was a little curious. She had suspected the identity of Gong Jia and Hua Jin. Because Gong Jia had bought the house with his credit card, the house was registered under Hua Jin's name. She knew who Hua Jin was. He was a big celebrity. Many big celebrities came here to buy houses. It was not the first time she had seen a big celebrity buying a house. There were even many big bosses who bought villas for their mistresses. It wasn't like there weren't any, however, the relationship between this Gong Jia and Hua Jin made her a little confused. In the end, as soon as she entered, she saw Hua Jin in a bathrobe. For a moment, he could not help but let his imagination run wild. Could it be that between the two of them, was it that kind of relationship? This man's partner was Hua Jin, who was rumored to be gay. Could it be that they were also kept as mistresses? The salesperson felt that he was in a bad mood. Why were all handsome men in pairs? Finally, after completing the procedures to hand over the room, the salesperson left with a gloomy face, clutching his heart. Gong Jia walked over with Natalia in his arms. Seeing Hua Jin in a bathrobe, he cleared his throat and said sternly, "Please don't show your chest in front of Natalia." Hua Jin was dumbstruck. He reacted and immediately retorted, "What do you mean by exposing my breasts? I'm well covered. Your chest is exposed." Gong Jia looked righteous. Unsightly. Hua Jin was speechless. He was so angry that he gritted his teeth, but he told himself not to stoop to the level of such people. Hence, he went back to his room with an ashen face. It was not until he changed into his pajamas that Gong Jia looked better. Yu covered her mouth and snickered at the side. Hua Jin felt very aggrieved. Did he lose his basic personal freedom just to take care of a child for him? Chapter 4093. Yu looked at Hua Jin and then at Gong Jia and muttered to herself. What a pair of clowns. Especially when she saw Hua Jin's steely expression, Yu's heart ached for him for a few seconds. At night, Natalia was still pestering Gong Jia to sleep with her. Initially, Gong Jia wanted Hua Jin to coax Natalia to sleep. However, Natalia was a little picky about the bed and the person. She only recognized Gong Jia and not Hua Jin. Hua Jin had no choice but to find Gong Jia's room awkwardly. He braced himself and knocked on the door. Gong Jia happened to be awake. When he opened the door and saw him, he was a little surprised. What's wrong? Natalia misses you. Hua Jin sighed and said helplessly, this child doesn't really recognize me. She only recognizes you. Moreover, without you, she can't sleep peacefully. Gong Jia was stunned for a long time. He said helplessly, if you can't handle her, what will happen to you and her after I leave? I'll have to take one step at a time. There's nothing I can do. Gong Jia couldn't help but laugh. He walked to Hua Jin's room. The wall lamp was on. When Natalia heard Gong Jia's footsteps, she immediately sat up on the bed. When she saw him, she smiled. Daddy. She opened her arms to Gongjia. Gongjia walked slowly to the bedside and sat down on his side. However, he didn't respond to her hug immediately. Natalia was very surprised. She tilted her head and looked at him in confusion. She didn't understand why he didn't respond. Gongjia asked in a low voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" This was the first time Natalia saw Gongjia so serious. For a moment, she felt inexplicably guilty. Actually, she did sleep well. However, the bed was too unfamiliar. Moreover, she was not used to Huajin. After all, it was the first time they met. She tossed and turned on the bed, unable to fall asleep. Natalia stammered, I can't sleep. Recognizable bed? Yes. Natalia nodded fervently. I really tried to sleep, but the bed was too soft. I couldn't fall asleep. The mattress under her was the best zero-pressure mattress on the market bought by the Gongjia. It was not soft, but at least it was more comfortable than the hard iron beds in the hospital. Natalia had been sleeping on a metal bed all this time, so she couldn't get used to the soft and comfortable mattress all of a sudden. Close your eyes and don't let your imagination run wild. You'll fall asleep soon, okay? Gongjia comforted her gently. Nibbling on her lower lip, Natalia nodded with a frown on her face. However, when she lay down and her brother was about to tuck her in, he suddenly heard a choked sob coming from the woman. He was shocked and immediately leaned over. The sobbing sound became clearer. Huajin heard it too and reminded him softly. Is she crying? Gongjia frowned. This girl couldn't be that weak, right? Huajin frowned and said with a headache, it's her first time in such a foreign country. Maybe she hasn't gotten over the jet lag yet. Moreover, she's in a foreign bed with a foreign person. She'll naturally feel unfamiliar and scared. Why don't you keep her company tonight? I'll sleep in your room. With that, Huajin tried to find an excuse to escape. Gongjia shouted in a low voice, you're not allowed to leave. Huajin's footsteps were forcefully stopped. Chapter 4094. Huajin stopped in his tracks. Sit over here. Gongjia ordered again. Huajin had no choice but to move back to the bed stiffly like a robot. Lie down. Huajin lay down with a straight back. Hug her. Just as Huajin was about to retort, he vaguely felt a sharp gaze sweeping over him in the dim light. Frightened, he immediately opened his arms and pulled Natalia into his embrace. A certain great demon king was finally satisfied. He whispered into Natalia's ear, Daddy will sing for you, okay? Natalia smiled in surprise. Okay. When Huajin heard that Gongjia wanted to sing, he was shocked. Oh my god. If Gongjia wanted to sing, wouldn't that be, wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves? He vaguely remembered that Yu didn't seem to have any talent in singing. If that was the case, Gongjia's uncle probably didn't have good musical genes either. Just as he was making wild guesses, Gongjia opened his thin lips slightly and sang in a deep, magnetic voice, outside the window, the raindrops, dong dong ding ding, falling into my heart, freezing into ice, memories of the past, 2 people in a room, roses and champagne. When you leave, I can only embrace the cold air. When Gongjia's deep voice came out of his thin lips, Huajin was stunned when he heard it. Perhaps he didn't have high expectations for Gongjia. He had always thought that Gongjia would be tone-deaf like Yu. However, he had forgotten that Yu's tone-deafness must have been inherited from Muyaja. He recalled that Gongjia's mother was Mu Qingcheng. Mu Qingcheng's voice had once shocked the entire capital. With such a singing mother, Yun Shishir's singing was also very good. And how could Gongjia's voice be bad? Good, his voice was even louder than Gu Xingzi's. In the world of singers, Gu Xingzi's voice was the only one that the general public recognized. His singing was soulful, magnetic, and had a penetrating power. This penetrating power did not refer to his voice, but it had a power that could penetrate one's heart. It's easy to infect everyone. To be fair, Gu Xing's singing skills were definitely not the best. However, his voice was the most contagious of all. Gong Jia was better than him. So much so that Hua Jin even had the urge to cry when he heard this song. Memories of you. Too many to count softly, softly lonely sings to me I'll never forget. Evidence of your presence. How else am I going to prove it? Waiting for the dawn together. Even if I lose you, I'm gonna love you too. Even if the whole world is dying, I gave myself an ending. Gong Jia rarely sang. He did not like to listen to music and rarely sang. In the past, when Yin Shishir pestered him to sing, he was too shy to say it. However, when it came to Natalia, he was able to throw away all his burdens naturally. After singing 2 songs, Gong Jia heard Hua Jin's steady breathing and knew that he had fallen asleep. Natalia's eyelids gradually became heavy and she was about to fall asleep. Just as he stood up and was about to leave, a soft little hand grabbed onto him. Gong Jia turned around and saw Natalia holding his hand. Her voice was hoarse as she said, "Don't go." Her soft voice carried a hint of reluctance. "Stay with me. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep, okay?" Chapter 4095. He sat down and caressed her forehead gently. "Good girl. You should sleep now. I want you to keep me company." Natalia's coquettish tone was irresistible to him. Feeling helpless, he lay down next to her and adjusted the quilt for her. Then, he gently rubbed the tip of his nose against her forehead. "Sleep. Good night." Natalia's lips curled into a smile. Her eyelids gradually closed, and she soon fell asleep. Before nightfall, Yu was sent back to the Mu family. When he told Yin Shishir that Gong Jia had adopted a daughter, Yin Shishir was so shocked that her eyes almost popped out of their sockets. How was that possible? Her brother was known for being a cold-hearted person. How could he adopt a daughter out of kindness? She couldn't wait to meet the girl who made her brother break his rules. She wanted to see what kind of girl she was. Yu had the keys to the villa. There were a total of 3 keys. One for Hua Jin, one for Gong Jia, and one for him. However, the next day, when Yin Shishir opened the door of the villa and appeared at the bedroom door with Yu, she saw the 3 of them hugging each other as they slept. She didn't feel good at all. When Yu saw his mother standing rooted to the ground in a daze, he, too, poked his head in curiously. However, when he saw Gong Jia hugging Natalia while the latter hugged Hua Jin to sleep, he was so shocked that he sucked in a breath of cold air. Ahem. Yu cleared his throat solemnly. Gong Jia was a light sleeper. When he heard the commotion, he opened his eyes abruptly and looked in the direction of the sound. He saw Yin Shishir and Yu standing at the door. He was slightly shocked and immediately sat up on the bed. He ran his fingers through his messy hair and followed Yin Shishir's gaze to the side. Hua Jin, oh, he remembered now. Last night, the 3 of them seemed to have slept together. However, wasn't it normal for men to sleep together? Why was his sister looking at him with such a meaningful gaze? Gong Jia's lips twitched. Could she have misunderstood something? However, Yin Shishir didn't say it out loud. If she didn't say it out loud, he wouldn't even have a chance to explain himself. If he tried to force an explanation, it would only make things worse. It would only make things worse. However, the way she looked at him seemed to be saying, "I know, you don't have to explain." Gong Jia felt even more frustrated. He stretched out his long leg and immediately kicked Hua Jin awake. Hua Jin also woke up at once. He sat up abruptly. When he saw Yin Shishir, he thought that he was dreaming. He giggled a few times. When he turned his head, he saw that Gong Jia was also there. He immediately couldn't wake up anymore. Why was he sleeping in this room? Hua Jin thought about it carefully and finally remembered. He remembered. Yesterday, Gong Jia had sung for Natalia. In the end, he had fallen asleep while listening. It had been a very peaceful night. He didn't have any dreams. He didn't know what happened after that. Looking at the situation, could it be that Gong Jia had also stayed in this room last night? That must be it. Natalia must have been reluctant to let him go and pestered him to stay. When he saw the strange look in Yun Shishir's eyes, Hua Jin's eyelids twitched even more violently. He had also been reduced to the same awkward situation as Gong Jie. He also felt that Yun Shishir had obviously misunderstood something. However, since she didn't say it out loud, he couldn't explain it either. What should he do? He couldn't let her misunderstand. Chapter 4096. Why are you sleeping here? Hua Jin paused and suddenly slapped his head. Ah. He immediately pretended to be calm and said, I remember now. Yesterday, Natalia couldn't sleep and wanted to pester you. You sang for her, and then I fell asleep while listening. But why are you sleeping here too? Didn't you ask me to develop a relationship with Natalia? Gong Jie knew very well that Hua Jin was deliberately saying this to explain to Yun Shishir so that she wouldn't let her imagination run wild. Thus, he played along and said, she didn't want me to leave, so I lay down. I was sleepy too, so I didn't think too much about it. Why, do you mind? I don't mind. No wonder you slept so tightly the whole night. Hua Jin quickly said, but what was the name of the song you sang yesterday? It was so good. I'll download it and listen to it. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie asked in a low voice, did I sing? Yun Shishir's attention was immediately diverted. Shao Jie, did you sing? Her astonished look surprised Hua Jin even more. From what you're saying, he never sang before? Yun Shishir nodded. Shao Jie doesn't like to listen to music, so he doesn't like to sing either. But I think his singing should be very good. Gong Jie's face turned green from embarrassment. No way. How can that be? I just think it's very good. Hua Jin said to Yun Shishir, when I heard him sing yesterday, it was really amazing. But I've never heard that song before. Is it an old song? Gong Jie ignored him. This song was actually composed by him when he was bored. Because he didn't like to sing, but that day, when he was sitting by the beach, a melody suddenly appeared in his mind for some reason. The lyrics were also born naturally along with the melody. There was no one around, so he sang it himself. As he sang it, he remembered it deeply. To be more precise, the melody and lyrics were all randomly hummed by him. When Hua Jin heard this song, he was a little surprised at first. She was surprised by his charming voice and even more surprised that he had never heard such a beautiful song before. Logically speaking, with such a high standard of arrangement, it should be an instant hit. Why had he never heard of it before? Hua Jin didn't know that the Gong Jie was humming to himself. If he knew, he would be shocked. Natalia was woken up by the voices of a few people. Coincidentally, she had slept enough. She opened her eyes and blinked. Gong Jie realized that she was awake and gently pinched her cheek. You're awake? Like a kitten, Natalia snuggled into his arms and hugged his waist. Daddy, Gong Jie, too, reached out to hug her and gently caressed her silky hair. Such an intimate snuggle made you feel very uncomfortable. Why was she so clingy to Gong Jie but not willing to play with him? He didn't know what this uncle of his was capable of. Could it be that he had secretly fed Natalia some kind of bewitching potion? Gong Jie suddenly realized that Yu was staring at him with an inexplicable hatred. When Hua Jin saw this, he couldn't help but want to laugh. This uncle and niece pair was really too cute. This was the first time he had seen Yu jealous.